Chapter 101. Eunuch's son was directly stunned. Even his master didn't hold an umbrella. As a servant, he could only clench his teeth and have the person next to him put away the umbrella. On the side, the young ladies of the aristocratic families looked at each other. They couldn't take their gazes away from Belegaju's body. Hellion Vivian understood this kind of feeling. After all, a man with such a good figure like Belegaju was really too rare to see. Not to mention his broad shoulders and long legs, his temperament was outstanding. Especially when the rain hit his outer robe and black hair, he just reached out his hand and tucked the hair in front of his forehead behind his head. It was indescribably cold and untamed, with a never-before-seen wildness. It deeply broke the feeling of abstinence on his body, making people want to see more and more. Hellion Vivian snorted twice. This third prince, in order to find her, really lost a lot. This time, he really sold his body thoroughly. If it wasn't for the wrong time, she would have definitely whistled twice at him. A person like this who could live so handsomely at any time must also have a certain level of skill. Eunuch's son also noticed the gazes of the young ladies. He directly took off his outer robe, wanting to put it on his master. However, the royal family's movements were too fast, and his legs were too short. He simply couldn't keep up. Hellion Vivian was originally very happy to watch this play, but what she didn't expect was that Belegaju would suddenly turn his head and look in her direction. No, it should be said that he was looking in the direction of the manservants. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. In her heart, she fiercely said, "Third prince, you're really something. You won't even let a man go." However, Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked at the black clouds that were not far away. The corners of her mouth slowly curved up. Her thin lips slightly moved, as if she was counting down, 1, 2, 3. Following the sound of her 3, a flock of winged beasts flew over from the west with a whoosh. They were as black as layers upon layers of black clouds. Everyone was stunned, looking at this scene in disbelief. What's going on? It's a beast tide. Why is there a beast tide at this time? Didn't you say it would only be available in summer? You're asking me? How would I know? Quickly inform the dean. However, in the blink of an eye, the superior compound was in chaos. Actually, the winged beasts wouldn't really hurt people, but what they liked to do the most was to grab people from the ground and throw them down. In their minds, this was a way to express their friendliness. However, the students who fought with them only wanted to say, "Thank you, they really don't need this kind of friendliness." His legs were about to break. Holy shit, where are they going to take them? Miss. Young master. Probably because they thought it wasn't chaotic enough, the screams of those servant girls could practically lift the roof of the entire superior compound. Hellion Mai was knocked until her head was dizzy. She held onto her long skirt, afraid that she would fall. In the entire superior compound that was boiling with noise, perhaps only the royal was the calmest. His long sleeves weren't stained with any dust as he stood in the middle of that group of winged beasts. His figure didn't change in the slightest, but that pair of phoenix eyes looked even more dangerous and bright than before. All of the winged beasts didn't dare to grab him. With great difficulty, there was a winged beast that extended its claws, wanting to play with the royal. The royal glanced over, and that winged beast immediately howled and obediently retracted its claws. It was so scared that it almost fell from the sky. Hellion Vivian watched from the side with some admiration. He deserved to be called the royal. Not only did he eat both men and women, he could even handle a divine beast. Hellion Vivian. A man's special deep voice suddenly sounded. It seemed to carry an unprecedented patience, and it was exceptionally pleasing to the ears. Hellion Vivian's arms stiffened. She thought that Belegaju had discovered her. However, her years of reason told her that by all means, she shouldn't turn around. Maybe it was a trap. As it turned out, it really was a trap. Belegaju saw that he couldn't trick that little fox out like this. The tip of his tongue streaked across his thin lips, and an exceptionally bewitching smile slowly blossomed from the corners of his mouth. It was like a spider lily that bloomed in hell, carrying a soul-stirring bewitchment and an incomparably sexy deep voice. He paused between each word. "You really want this highness to personally take action and capture you back, Chem?" That HM of his was still very tasteful. It didn't sound like he was trying to capture someone, but rather like he was playing a game of hide and seek. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her 2 arms had already been pulled up into the air by the winged beasts. Her posture was more handsome and free than anyone else's. She didn't struggle like the others, but rather, she was waiting for this kind of opportunity. If you come back on your own, this highness can consider whether or not to let you go. Belagaju's figure under the moonlight appeared even more celestial. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. She said in her heart, "Third Prince, you're looking down on me, Hellion Vivian, too much. You should leave that face of yours to deceive little girls." However, Ari, listening to that kind of voice, she really did want to make a move. But she didn't believe that he would let her go. He wasted so much energy looking for her, just to let her go. She didn't believe it. According to the royal's personality, after he caught her, he would definitely dismember her into 10,000 pieces. Oh, no, perhaps even the royal wouldn't disdain dismembering her into 10,000 pieces. He would just throw her to the ground, and then send a few people to remove her legs and claws. He would even sit on the side and drink tea without blinking. After being together for a few days, she understood this man's methods too well. He was elegant, but ruthless to the point of wanting a person's life. Let's go. Hellion Vivian finally made a decision. Using the wind brought by the winged beasts, she successfully hid in that group of servants, young masters, and young ladies who were captured. The people standing below tried every possible method to bring down the winged beasts, but there were too many of them. Even if they each dealt with one, they couldn't handle it all. What the hell was going on? White Academy unexpectedly had so many winged beasts flying over on such a rainy day. It was too strange. Everyone had their own thoughts in their hearts, and they couldn't be blamed for thinking this way because there was an agreement between the Academy and the beast horde. The Academy's people wouldn't go to Spirit Forest to wantonly hunt spirit beasts, and the spirit beasts also couldn't casually attack Academy students. Right now, this group of winged beasts, you said they were attacking, right? It also didn't seem like it. But what the hell was the meaning of bringing them high up into the sky? Belagaju looked at the gradually ascending horde of beasts. That pair of deep and narrow eyes were cold to the extreme. Even his voice was like a flower that bloomed in the North Pole. Each word was ice cold. "It seems that you don't plan on coming back." "Ah, that's not up to you." When Hellion Vivian heard these words of his, her breathing stopped, and even her heart lightly trembled. Chapter 102. Little White is in front. Yuan Ming's lazy voice sounded in her ear. Hellion Vivian concentrated her energy, her eyes looking forward, thinking about where to land in a moment. Unfortunately, the third prince wouldn't let her go. His voice didn't have the slightest bit of warmth. "This is the last time, come back by yourself, and I will treat it as if nothing happened." Hellion Vivian didn't know why, but when she heard these words, she unexpectedly felt that there was a faint hurt in that demonically cold voice. Hurt? How could it be? Hellion Vivian thought that the other side must be tired. She was also tired. From the beginning of their escape until now, they had changed no less than 3 identities. Each identity tested her ability to adapt on the spot. Moreover, the confrontation with the third prince was more exhausting than any other mission she had undertaken. Adding on this body, her physical strength simply couldn't keep up. Therefore, the current her only wanted to quickly get out. Hellion Vivian clenched her teeth and continued to use the winged beast's strength to fly out. Her arms couldn't bend, because once there was an abnormality, the winged beast would leave her behind. Then all of her plans would be in vain. Belagaju seemed to have used up all of his patience. His long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed, and his long ink-black hair fiercely blossomed with his movements. It was like the darkness wandering in the world, as if he was summoning something. Finally, the wind stopped, and the clouds surged. Behind him appeared a cloud that seemed to be dyed with blood. All of the shadows stopped the movements of their hands. Even Eunuch's son opened his mouth wide in surprise, reaching out to cover his chest. What is that? There is something in the clouds. Fire Chiline. It was unknown who shouted this sentence. The entire academy boiled over. especially those students who yearned for the mythological beast in their dreams. One after another, they opened their eyes wide, staring unblinkingly at this heavenly scene. Some people said that the fire on the fire Chiline's body could destroy all evil creatures in hell. Demons and monsters, none of them dared to approach. Burning on the banks of Wangchuan Lake, never extinguishing for 3 lifetimes. This was the power of an ancient mythological beast, no one could stop it. Only, how could it appear here? Everyone knew that it wasn't an easy matter to see the fire Chiline. It was the most difficult divine beast to tame in the world. No one had ever been able to make it truly submit. Even the former third prince had been abandoned by it without hesitation. It was cold and mysterious, and would only occasionally appear in the spirit forest. It would never come to the academy. Could it be? Was it because of the beast tide? That must be it. Although the third prince had once made a contract with the fire Chiline, the previous contract did not mean anything. Especially when the fire Chiline came out, the first one it attacked was the third prince. If the fire Chiline listened to his orders, it wouldn't appear in the air like this right now. Instead, it should be standing next to the third prince. The students looked at the sudden burst of flames under their feet and felt that things were beyond their imagination. Only Eunuch Sun's eyelids twitched twice. He looked at his master with a meaningful gaze. The man slowly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger. His thin lips moved slightly, like a king walking out of the flames. Eunuch Sun's heart thumped. His Highness, he. When Beligaju gave the order, he did not forget to turn his head and look at Eunuch Sunday. It was that look that made Eunuch Sun completely shut up. He swallowed all the secrets back into his throat, but his heart was unable to suppress his excitement. It couldn't be wrong. His Highness was commanding the fire Chiline, but in order to not let others see, the fire Chiline attacked its master first when it came out. In fact, the fire Chiline that was flying in the air and spitting out flames was also feeling very stifled. From the moment it was summoned, its heart was filled with excitement. But its master actually wanted it to spit fire at him first. This was simply a test of a divine beast's loyalty. It originally wanted to be mighty and unyielding, but it really could not resist its master's cold gaze. It could only show its might and scare those humans. Now that it saw those little guys running around and shouting, it only wanted to blow bubbles out of boredom. What did its master summon it for? Was it for fun? Not likely. Its master's thoughts had never been so simple. The fire Chiline looked at Beligaju with hidden bitterness. However, Bailey Jiaoju acted as if he didn't even recognize it. He calmly and unhurriedly avoided the fire at his side. After that, he stood behind the imperial bodyguards with an expression of "I'm very weak, quickly come and protect me." When the fire Chiline saw this, the corner of its mouth fiercely twitched. It heard the order that came from the stream of consciousness. There was not the slightest ripple. There was only an indifference that made people submit. Have all those winged beasts come back, immediately. The fire Chiline listened to that domineering and cold voice and then looked at Beligaju's figure standing in the corner. It let out a long sigh. It was really too uncoordinated. It was really too much of an act. If you're too slow, this lord will break your wings. It was still a tone without any warmth, but the fire Chiline's entire body was stiff. Listen, this is the master of my house. Stupid humans, the prince in front of you who needs your protection is a fake. No longer daring to silently criticize its master, the fire Chiline quickly got up and swept towards the west. It was a grand ancient mythological beast. When had it not been awe-inspiring and aloof like a god? When those little mythological beasts greeted it, it never paid them any attention. Its chin was slightly raised, crushing the hearts of those little mythological beasts. After all, a king should have the demeanor of a king, but now, it was unexpectedly like an eagle catching chicks, scaring those winged beasts back one by one. However, it was already used to it. Compared to its master who made it eat lettuce and didn't allow it to protest, this kind of life was too happy. Fuck. Boss. I finally saw the legendary boss. After the winged beasts saw the fire Chiline, their wings flew even faster. It was enough to see how excited they were. If a comparison had to be made, it was equivalent to seeing a living idol. "Boss, how did you appear here?" The fire Chalene really didn't want to say that it only came out to scare them. It could only pretend to be profound and make an en sound. The winged beasts were even more excited. "Boss, can I shake hands with you?" Hellion Vivian simply couldn't listen anymore. What kind of situation was this? Even a celebrity meet and greet wasn't this exaggerated. Okay. Even if the fire Chalene was relatively handsome, it was still a beast. There was no end to beast love. You guys have to be a bit more rational. Hey, what made Hellion Vivian feel gratified was that fortunately, the winged beast that caught her was more reliable. Hellion Vivian lifted her eyes and was just about to praise that little winged beast a few words. But she saw that it was completely red. Its two eyes emitted red hearts as it foolishly looked at the fire Chalene. It was incomparably bashful. "I also want to go over." Hellion Vivian. Chapter 103. Boss, that's boss. The little winged beast's tone was becoming more and more girlish, even lowering its head to ask Hellion Vivian, "Don't you think boss is very handsome? Those sky-piercing horns, those twinkling scales, and his beautiful red hair. Everyone says that when he transforms into human form, he's even more handsome." Hellion Vivian pulled back her lips and smiled apologetically. "I really can't understand what kind of aesthetic view you have." "No problem, you humans generally don't have good eyesight." The little winged beast shrugged its shoulders and simply stopped its movements. Hellion Vivian chuckled twice and helplessly said, "Should I say thank you?" "No need, I can understand." The little winged beast's eyes flashed, and in a flash, it turned its head. Hey, you can't fly back." Hellion Vivian's arm was still being held by the winged beast, and she was caught unprepared by the sudden situation. Fuck. What did that fire Chalene come out for? Was it really good to sell one's looks like this? "Woman, in a little while, we're going to fly back." Yuan Ming curled his thin lips in interest. "If I were you, I would think carefully about how to face that third prince's anger." Hellion Vivian didn't say anything, but her increasingly tight eyes revealed her current situation. On the left was the cliff, and on the right was White Academy. According to the winged beast's current flying method, just as Yuan Ming said, in less than a minute, she would be directly surrounded by the third prince's imperial bodyguards. The distance was getting closer and closer, so close that she was already able to see that man's cold and lonely back. This won't do, she must make a decision quickly. Hellion Vivian looked at the forested mountain peak. Her left hand suddenly exerted force, and her body quickly rotated. In a flash, she escaped from that servant's coat and quickly descended from the sky. She could still hear Yuan Ming's arrogant roar in her ear. "Woman, you're crazy. You'll die if you fall like this. You can't become a demon if you're not crazy." As Hellion Vivian replied to Yuan Ming's words, she didn't forget to throw out the armaments that she had brought along with her. One after another, she stacked them on top of each other and fastened them to the cliff wall in order to reduce the feeling of falling. The white cat also fainted. If it wasn't for the fact that its magical power hadn't recovered yet, it could directly become bigger and carry Hellion Vivian. Most importantly, it was still in the heavenly tribulation stage. It couldn't even protect itself, let alone carry Hellion Vivian. The wind was too strong. It could only hold on tightly to Hellion Vivian's shoulder, not daring to let go. Between the armament cultivator and the stone wall, there was a swish of flames. The white cat took a deep breath and didn't dare to exhale. Hellion Vivian only felt numbness in her left hand and pain in her right hand. All the cells in her body were subconsciously planning how to stop this torture. Shua. With the last sound, Hellion Vivian swelled up all the internal energy in her body. The surrounding air changed and slowly formed a whirlwind, dragging her whole body up. Hellion Vivian used the wind to beautifully and handsomely flip sideways in the air. Then, she beautifully stood still and avoided the incoming broken tree. That was close. Even if it was the devil's emissary Yuan Ming, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat because of Hellion Vivian's bold action. Hellion Vivian only shook her numb hand and slightly curved her thin lips. Beautiful escape. "I'm afraid there's still one more obstacle." The white cat looked at the huge figure that appeared in front of it. A trace of cold light flashed through its amber eyes. Hellion Vivian also felt the danger. She turned her head and met the huge figure's eyes. Her eyelids jumped. Demonic beast. As long as it's not a fire Cheline. The white cat arrogantly jumped onto Hellion Vivian's shoulder. Go, destroy it. Hellion Vivian chuckled twice. This. Who is the human and who is the beast? However, that demonic beast didn't give her a chance to complain. It was extremely hungry and had already gone berserk. When it smelled the smell of meat, it only wanted to eat a good meal, but what it didn't know was that Hellion Vivian also wanted to go berserk. This was the first time she was forced to go berserk. She needed to vent. Shua. Hellion Vivian directly used the wind to rise up. Like a sharp knife, she hung in the air and directly grabbed the demonic beast's throat. That demonic beast glanced at her, as if mocking her for overestimating herself. It wanted to open its bloody mouth and swallow her whole. That demonic beast seemed to be a master that bullied the weak and feared the weak. Seeing that her left hand was inconvenient, it directly bit towards her left hand. Its attack was also concentrated on Hellion Vivian's left hand. Seeing that it was about to pounce over, Hellion Vivian clenched her teeth. Her true power surged, and her 2 fingers closed together on its neck. She exerted strength, and a white light shot out. However, it wasn't as loose and soft as before. Like a swift and fierce blade, it brought along a cold light as it all surged into that demonic beast's throat. That demonic beast first paused. It was in severe pain as if it was being pulled back and forth by the wind coming from all directions. However, in a flash, it was pulled by the wind and lost all of its strength. Roar tilde the demonic beast raised its head and roared. Its volume was extremely loud, and its body shook like a sieve. It actually seemed to be in great pain. That huge body loudly fell to the ground, crushing countless shrubs. Dust flew up, and moonlight poured down. In the empty space, only the incomparably handsome backs of a human and a cat remained. On the other side, all of the winged beasts had stopped in the courtyard of the superior compound. They were well behaved, as if they had been tamed by someone, and lazily extended their claws. Basically, those young ladies and young masters who had been captured had all safely returned. As soon as they touched the ground, they put on their cloaks and cut a sorry figure. However, Hellion Vivian wasn't among these people. Eunuch's son somewhat didn't dare to look at His Highness' expression. He only swallowed his saliva and looked at the servant's outer garment hanging on the winged beast's claw. He didn't need to think to know who had just worn it. The rain had already stopped, and the black clouds had completely dispersed. Beligaju calmly stood there. His long sleeves floated in the air, 1,000 threads as black as ink, and his silver mask drew an icy light. After a long time, he finally said, "She's still alive. I will find her and bring her back." Finished speaking, he indifferently turned around. His whole body surged with a fierce aura that overflowed to the heavens. His white robe and ink-black hair were sent flying towards the sky. His demon-like figure was dripping with raindrops, and people couldn't help but look again and again. The fire Cheline was hidden in the fantasy space. Its voice was heavy as it opened its mouth. "Master, she's the Phoenix girl." "So what?" The tip of Beligaju's tongue slowly slid past the wound on his thin lips. His devilishly cold and evil aura was unintentionally exposed. "As long as someone provokes me, I won't easily let them go, no matter who they are." The fire Cheline had never seen its master reveal such an expression. Several hundred years, or even 1,000 years. Master had always treated everything as a game. It wasn't that he hadn't shown interest in other things before, but that kind of interest was too weak and too brief. It was as big as this time. It was simply too little, too little. Chapter 104. Pass down the order. Not paying attention to the fire Cheline's thoughts, Beligaju lowered his eyes and tightened his grip on the outer garment in his hand. All the Imperial bodyguards are to stop searching and withdraw the checkpoint at the foot of the mountain. Shadow stared blankly and asked in disbelief, "All withdrawn?" His Highness just now looked like he wouldn't give up until he caught Miss Hellion. How could he suddenly be soft-hearted? The next second, Shadow discovered that he was wrong. because His Highness wasn't soft-hearted at all. Instead, he changed to an even more ruthless method. Place shadows everywhere under the walls outside the city. Pull up a fishing net and don't release arrows. This Highness wants to catch her alive. His voice was very low, but it had an unquestionable decisiveness. Although Shadow was too worried about this kind of His Highness and whether or not his movements would be too big and attract the attention of the 4 great clans, he clearly understood that His Highness never feared the 4 great clans. Watch the city gates. If there are old people, pregnant women, and some people with inconvenient movements who want to leave the city, check carefully. In addition, send people to follow Haze. Beligaju once again slowly raised his thin lips. His voice was so slow that it made people's ears numb. As long as someone approaches him, catch them for me. Not knowing why, when Shadow heard this sentence, he instinctively prayed for that woman. He thought that if Miss Hellion was smart enough, she wouldn't go find the Hay family's young master. Because His Highness recently saw the Hay family as if he didn't like them. In the wee hours of the morning, Hellion Vivian walked out of the forest in a sorry state. She took a long breath and then began to seriously size herself up. She raised her head and sighed, "I'm so handsome." "Are you talking about the stinky mud all over your body?" The white cat disdainfully jumped to the side. "You're still in the mood to make fun of yourself. Looks like you haven't been driven crazy by the 3rd prince. He's indeed shrewd to the point of not being human." Hellion Vivian laughed. "It's just that I have rough skin and thick flesh. If it were someone else, they would have long been broken down by him. You say, I just didn't agree to cooperate with him to anger the retired emperor. Is there a need for him to send so many people to surround me in the courtyard?" Although she really shouldn't have joined hands with the empress to scheme against him. However, the 3rd prince shouldn't be that ruthless. Could it be that the 2nd generation of the royal family had a stronger desire to control? Couldn't stand others going against him? Hellion Vivian couldn't figure it out, so she stopped thinking about it. Yuan Ming rubbed his chin, his eyes flashing with a light. Everything was obviously very successful. Why would the ancient divine beast Fire Chiline appear there? Purely wanting to come out and take a stroll? No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible. Not only was Yuan Ming puzzled, even Hellion Vivian was wary of the Fire Chiline's appearance. Someone wants to tame him. The white cat's cold voice temporarily dispelled their suspicions. During this period of time, people from the White Academy have entered the spirit forest in order to find it, or perhaps to force it out. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. The Fire Chiline is not that easy to tame. That's right. The white cat turned its head and looked at the road behind it. That's why those people returned again and again without success. I think they probably angered the Fire Chiline, so it burned the White Academy. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Then this is too much of a coincidence. It didn't burn anywhere, only the superior compound. Because the person who wants to tame it lives in the superior compound. The white cat lifted its head and looked deeply at Wei Wei. It's that Murong prince's manners heir, Murong Changfeng. When Yuan Ming heard this name, he also subconsciously looked towards Hellion Vivian and lightly coughed twice. Hellion Vivian didn't hold back and hooked her lips. Why didn't you burn him to death, this trash of a man who can't accomplish anything but spoils everything? Hellion Vivian, who had no way of knowing the truth, had already put all the blame on Murong Changfeng. From the bottom of her heart, she firmly believed that if it wasn't for Murong Changfeng wanting to tame the Fire Chiline, the Fire Chiline wouldn't have suddenly appeared at the superior compound, ruining her entire plan. Then she should have already been taken out of the city by the winged beast, and wouldn't be in this predicament like now. Sigh, it's still more practical to plan how to get out of the city. With her skill, climbing over the city walls wasn't a problem. However, the smart royal family wouldn't have people lying in ambush around the city walls. Once she made a move, she wouldn't know if she'd fall into a trap. It seemed that going out through the city gates was still a bit safer. However, she didn't have a divine beast by her side. If she let Little White go back and summon one, she would inevitably have to go through the White Academy. At that time, maybe the 3rd prince would follow the vine to the melon and follow the divine beast to find her. It seemed that she couldn't count on the divine beast. Hellion Vivian knew that if there was even the slightest possibility, She shouldn't make the third prince an enemy. Too tiring. Forget it, the most important thing now was to change her appearance. With her appearance, she'd be recognized in minutes if she walked out. First of all, she had to disguise herself. Hellion Vivian looked at the reflection of her face in the lake water. Disguising herself wasn't difficult for her, but if she wanted to disguise herself without leaving any traces, she had to find an identity suitable for herself. She was always a reporter, and her opponent was the third prince. Therefore, she couldn't have the slightest bit of carelessness. Originally, Hellion Vivian had already disguised herself as a pregnant woman, but after looking left and right, her heart faintly felt that it wasn't too safe. Wouldn't it be better to show her true appearance? The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth slowly pulled up into a light smile. She increasingly felt that this idea wasn't bad. Her face was too dark, and the target was too big. If she restored her appearance, it would become the most natural protective color. Because everyone knew that the capital's #1 hedonistic young lady was really ugly. Who would have thought that there would be a day when she would be astonishingly beautiful? Hellion Vivian stood up and used the remaining time to spread all the strawberries that she had picked from the paradise space on her face. Those black things magically fell off her face, and her white skin was like egg white that had just broken out of its shell, sparkling and translucent. Under the illumination of the moonlight, it even emitted a faint glow. Her tall and exquisite nose bridge, her pink lips, and those bright eyes that were as bright as the moon. Every part of her was perfect. Her face was dainty, and her temperament was refined. She was like a fairy that had descended from the heavens. That small white face carried a faint coldness and arrogance, as if it was because of this that she appeared even more mysterious and enchanting. If it was said that Hellion Jiao's beauty made men want to hold her in their hearts and love her dearly, Hellion Vivian's beauty was soul-stirring and soul-stirring. She could be as light as a young girl, but she could also be as indifferent as a queen. Who was the real #1 beauty in the capital? Just by looking at Hellion Vivian's face, people's hearts would naturally be able to discern. However, just as Hellion Vivian had said, no one would have thought that such a woman would be the capital's famous waste young lady. Chapter 105. Early in the morning, in the capital of the city, the peddlers always came out earlier than the pedestrians. The old lady bent over, carrying steaming hot tofu pudding. A bowl only sold for half a copper, so cheap and delicious that it made people click their tongue. There were many people leaving the city in a day, so the area near the city gate was always much more lively than other places. Hellion Vivian didn't wear conspicuous clothes. Standing in the crowd, perhaps no one could recognize her. If she didn't raise her head, no one would give her a second glance. She was like a normal person leaving the city. First, she sat at the old lady's place, asked for a bowl of tofu pudding, and listened to the news all around. Did you guys know, the third prince seems to be catching someone. Catching someone? Catching who? I heard it's the Hellion family's young lady who lost her martial chi. Why does His Highness want to catch her? It shouldn't be that she did something wrong, and angered His Highness. Who knows, but later on, the third prince again withdrew his people, saying that he won't catch her. He probably feels that it's a waste of time, and that it's not worth taking a woman seriously. Won't catch her? Hellion Vivian's hand that was eating the tofu pudding paused, and the light in her eyes flashed. Carefully thinking about it, the third prince really should have stopped. With such great fanfare, he ordered a search of every courtyard in the White Academy, and even the superior compound. He didn't let those aristocratic young ladies and young masters get drenched in the rain for an entire night. The 4 great clans would certainly have opinions about him. After all, they all loved their own family's children. Even if no one called those aristocratic young ladies out to watch, if it weren't for the third prince, they wouldn't have encountered the beast tide. No matter how much the retired emperor doted on the third prince, he still wouldn't allow that man to act recklessly. Or maybe it was really like what everyone said, the third prince suddenly realized that using so much effort on a good-for-nothing young lady like her, it simply wasn't worth it. Hellion Vivian laughed mockingly, but didn't change her original plan. Even if the third prince really didn't plan to catch her, she still couldn't relax her vigilance. What if, right now, everything was a facade that man deliberately created in order to make her lose her guard? Wouldn't she be in trouble then? A trace of shrewdness flashed through the depths of Hellion Vivian's eyes. She held the spoon in her mouth and finished the last mouthful of tofu pudding. It was as if she hadn't heard the conversation just now. However, when she passed by, everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths. Aside from amazement in their eyes, there was nothing else. Even when the tofu pudding in their hands spilled, they didn't feel anything. Fairy. I see a fairy. Thus, on this day, the capital was in an uproar. Many people said that they had seen a fairy who was even more beautiful than the number one beauty in the capital, Hellion Jiawa. That temperament, that appearance, that figure, even though she was wearing coarse cloth, it was difficult to conceal that elegance and refinement. The shadows who were lying in ambush in the city did not have the leisure to care about what kind of fairy appeared in the capital. What they wanted to find the most was an ugly woman, especially ugly dark-skinned women. Therefore, this matter was not reported to Beligaju. However, the Hellion Jiawa, who was out on business, heard the news as soon as she arrived in the city. The servant girl who followed by her side curled her thin lips in disdain. A village girl dares to compare with our miss, how ridiculous. The Hellion Jiawa smiled. It was a very subtle feeling. Don't pay attention to it. Let them speak. Jiawa is right. Paying attention to these things will only make you lower yourself. Hellion Guang Yarrow laughed heartily, gratified. He walked out from the inn behind them. The Hellion Jiawa turned her head and called, "Father." Hellion Guang Yarrow nodded. "I called you out this time because I received a piece of news. This news will be of great help to you in the martial chi competition." "What news?" The Hellion Jiawa's eyes lit up. Hellion Guang Yarrow mysteriously curved his lips. "The armament convention is about to begin. There's an armament there that was personally made by young Master Wu Shuang. It's very suitable for women to use. If you can obtain that armament and match it with the martial chi in your body, you'll definitely be able to win the championship in the martial chi competition." Armament. The more Hellion Jiawa listened, the brighter her pair of eyes became. As far as every martial artist was concerned, obtaining an armament that was suitable for them was simply more important than anything else. She had already advanced in rank. If she also possessed an astonishing armament, retired emperor would definitely have a whole new level of respect for her. Even that high and mighty person had always liked outstanding women. Hellion Guang Yarrow looked at his beloved daughter's expression and knew that she already had her own thoughts in her heart. He didn't say much and directly said, "Father has already helped you apply for leave from the academy. In a moment, when you go back, properly pack up and go out with the heir. He has Master Tu Laro's invitation and can bring you to the armament convention. Father has also already made arrangements with the person in charge over there. When you go, they'll make things convenient for you." The Hellion Jiawa wasn't very stupid. After listening, she asked in return, "Father, rather than spending so much effort to arrange these things, why didn't you directly talk to young Master Wu Shuang about the matter related to me?" "You think I didn't say anything?" Hellion Guang Yarrow heaved a long sigh. Young Master Wu Shuang was born in an aristocratic family of martial artists. You also know that all the martial artists in the world, no matter how powerful they are, have no choice but to admit that the armaments made by young Master Wu Shuang are simply impossible for them to replicate. In addition, his father is the chairman of the armament convention. This kind of person never shows himself easily, but he also won't refuse anyone. Young Master Wu Shuang actually received father's invitation and also wrote a reply letter to father. However, the letter was merely a few polite words. The general meaning was that he wanted that armament to choose his own master. He really doesn't listen to reason or force. Ah. The Hellion Jiawa gracefully smiled, the corners of her mouth carried complacency. "Father, you don't need to worry. When the time comes, Jiawa will naturally make young Master Wu Shuang see me in a new light. Since you have this kind of ambition, father can be at ease." Hellion Guang Yarrow happily patted her shoulder and instructed the servants by his side. "Take good care of Miss. You're not allowed to make the slightest mistake." "Yes." The servants lowered their eyes and had an appearance of respect and reverence. Helian Jiao's personal maid supported Helian Jiao by the arm as she turned around. At the same time, she said, "This servant heard that young Master Wu Shuang is actually a handsome man. It's said that in this capital, apart from the royal family, there's no one who can be more handsome than him. It's a pity that his body isn't good. Since childhood, he's been raised in the residence. Ordinarily, he'll only come out when there's an auction for armaments. His entire body emits the aura of an immortal. Oh, you usually only know how to inquire about this." The Helian Jiao didn't even turn her head. Her walking posture was indescribably arrogant. That personal maidservant knew that her mistress had not been in a good mood recently. She was afraid that she would say something wrong and get her arm pinched again. She cleverly changed the topic and said, "This servant heard this because it has something to do with Miss." Chapter 106. "Oh, what does that have to do with me?" Helian Jiao sneered, obviously not having a good temper. Her personal maid shrank her neck and forced a smile. "That young Master Wu Shuang likes music and rarely praises others. That day in the martial arts training, someone mentioned that Mrs. Qin's skills were excellent. He also said a few words, and every word he said was full of praise for Miss." As the maid spoke, she raised her eyes to look at Helian Jiao's face. Seeing that the corner of her mouth finally had a smile, she spoke more enthusiastically. "It can be seen that young Master Wu Shuang has been paying attention to Miss for a long time. It's just that he didn't have the opportunity to meet you." After Helian Jiao heard this, she used a handkerchief to cover up the smile that repeatedly rose on her vermilion lips. Her voice, however, didn't change, and her expression was indifferent. "Okay, I got it. You can't tell these things to other people, so as to avoid provoking any more trouble. This servant understands." The maidservant bowed and turned around to wipe off the cold sweat on her forehead. Helian Vivian was standing in front of them, looking at the wooden comb that the peddler had placed outside. It was completely unexpected that she would meet Helian Jiao and Helian Guangyao. Her first reaction was to lower her head and look at the headwear, pretending to be a passerby. After listening to the useful information, she took the things she wanted to buy and casually threw a tael of silver to the peddler. When they brushed past each other, it was hard not to notice her face. Helian Jiao seemed to be stunned for a moment, probably because she had never seen someone more beautiful than herself. Her first reaction was to turn around and take a second look. However, she only had time to see the back of that woman. She was dressed in coarse cloth and emitted a disdainful smell of poverty from head to toe. She was just an ordinary commoner. Helian Jiao disdainfully thought. Just as she was about to turn her head around, she saw that the people around her, one after another, sucked in a breath of air. Their gazes were far away, not even the slightest bit fell on her body. Even her personal servant girl also had a dumbstruck appearance. This made Helian Jiao's anger burst out. She reached out and pressed on the maid's arm, her sharp red nails piercing into it. "That person just now was very beautiful." Only then did the maidservant realize what mistake she had made, and the blood drained from her face in an instant. Her miss hated it when someone was more beautiful than her. She could not show the slightest trace of amazement in front of Miss. Therefore, that maid immediately shook her head and endured the pain. "She is beautiful, but compared to Miss, she is just a lump of mud under your feet. She has no temperament at all. You sure know how to talk." Helian Jiao let go of her hand and looked back. Her voice was cold. "With that kind of clothing, she dares to be mentioned in the same breath as this Miss. What a joke." Hearing this, the maid quickly echoed, Yes, Miss is right. She is not even fit to carry Miss's shoes." "All right, I'm tired of your flattery." Helian Jiao's tone was chilly as she blew on her fingertips. The light in her eyes dimmed. "Let's return to the academy first. Before we leave, I need to think of a way to make that slut never return to the academy again." She did not know where Helian Vivian had gone, but she could make her leave and never come back. Helian Jiao chuckled and lowered her head. The poison in her eyes was more terrifying than ever, but who was that woman who had just walked past? How could a village girl have such white and translucent skin? Every time it was the beginning of summer, what she spent the most effort on was how to prevent herself from being sunburned. She used the best pearl powder and sandalwood to maintain her current appearance. But that village girl clearly looked even more. Helian Jiawa gripped the handkerchief in her hand. Then she sneered in her heart. Even if her appearance was outstanding, she still had a poor family background. Even if she got married, she would still be nothing more than a concubine. Thinking like this, Helian Jiawa's heart calmed down. That small face the size of a palm recovered its previous dainty beauty. Wearing a veil on her face, she was finally supported into the sedan chair by the maid. However, she did not know that the person she wanted to frame was the village girl who had just passed by her. This is great. That younger sister of yours is also going to participate in the armament convention. I don't know what kind of underhanded tricks she'll play when the time comes. Yuan Ming's voice was always filled with the meaning of watching a good show. It was probably related to his identity. The devil's emissary originally liked to create some chaos, not to mention this kind of delicious food delivered to his doorstep. He liked it even more. White Cat had always had a cold appearance. It seemed to be contemplating as it looked at the crowd not far away. Its voice was indifferent. Wei Wei, you can't let that woman obtain that armament. Yuan Ming lazily glanced at it. It's only an armament. You don't understand. White Cat proudly lifted its chin. That's not an ordinary armament. When I was in the spirit forest, I heard my father and mother say that the best armament materials in the divine continent should be found in the spirit forest. However, many years ago, these materials were secretly moved to a place. That place is precisely young Master Wushuang's birthplace, Yang City. Generally speaking, armament materials that haven't been formed will release a kind of mysterious magnetic force. This is also the reason why armaments are different from ordinary weapons. It doesn't matter to us divine beasts, but if humans come in contact with them for a long time, they will be injured to a certain extent. That young Master Wushuang's body isn't good. I reckon it's because he's been with these materials since childhood. The armament he's making right now is probably his final work. It can be said to be perfect within perfection. Not only are the materials used, but even its appearance and performance is a top-notch divine weapon in the entire divine continent. The person who possesses it will have the magical power to split open mountains and rivers. After Yuan Ming heard this, that devilishly charming handsome face also started to ponder. Helian Vivian only smiled, neither servile nor overbearing. This armament and the wings of the night god I made last time, which one is more powerful? White Cat stared blankly and said, they're equally matched. Pausing for a moment, it once again added a sentence. You've already given away the wings of the night god. There's no meaning in comparing. I only want to know, between me and that young Master Wushuang, who is more powerful? Helian Vivian curved her thin lips, her long and narrow eyes carried a trace of light. I won't allow anyone to steal my business at the armament convention. White Cat's mouth twitched. In the end, you're still doing it for the money. Of course it's for the money. Helian Vivian looked at White Cat with an expression that was even more innocent than White Cat's. She sighed. If it weren't for the money, would I need to be so bitterly hiding? Refusing to be tempted by the third prince's beauty also requires courage. White Cat. Chapter 107. Where are we going next? Out of the city? Yuan Ming pulled the topic back. Helian Vivian thought for a while and shook her head. We can't just leave the city like this. Why can't we? Didn't you say that once you recover your original appearance, you won't be recognized? Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows. Helian Vivian touched her chin. Indeed, I won't be recognized, but the attention will be too great, unless someone goes out with me. You mean we should go find the second young master of the He family? The White Cat lazily stretched its body. Then let's go quickly, this lord is hungry. Helian Vivian nodded, and the step that she had just taken, she retracted it. Do you guys think that with the royal family's temperament, they will let me go so easily? The White Cat and Yuan Ming looked at each other, turned their heads in unison and said, it's hard to say. I think he is very vengeful. Helian Vivian tapped the wooden comb, but people also say that he is indifferent to everything, and the most important thing is that he even withdrew the guards in the city. Yuan Ming didn't participate in this kind of conversation, and only looked at Hellion Vivian with his arms crossed. The smile on the corner of his mouth didn't fade. The devil's emissary was different from the mythological beast. The latter was absolutely loyal. But the former enjoyed the contractor's absolute command more. If its master wasn't ruthless enough and firm enough, then its fighting strength would also decrease. Once its master wasn't confident enough, it could break free from the contract at any time and regain its freedom. At this time, you should. The white cat just opened its mouth. Hellion Vivian interrupted. At this time, you should follow your own feelings. Then why did you analyze so much just now? The white cat exploded. Hellion Vivian stroked it and continued to sigh. Be good, I am showing you my democratic side, but it turns out that I am not suitable for democracy, sigh. The white cat. Enough, who can drag this woman down? Don't go to Hazy. Hellion Vivian stood up straight, her beautiful face emitting a faint light under the morning light. We'll think of another way. Yuan Ming looked at the girl who was standing against the light and smiled evilly. Then he turned around and hid inside the ancient book. The white cat frowned and jumped onto the young girl's shoulder. Its voice was cold. You don't believe that the third prince will let you go so easily? Do you know when humans usually choose to strike when they're hunting? Hellion Wei glanced sideways at the white cat. When the prey is eating, because at that time, they are most relaxed and unguarded. For this reason, hunters will always place food around the traps to create a comfortable atmosphere. As she spoke, she raised her head and chuckled. If the third prince wants to be the hunter, you have to ask me if I'm willing to be the prey. The fog dispersed, and the sky in the east was finally bright. When Shadow saw the figure sitting on the wooden chair, he stared blankly. Did His Highness not sleep all night? Hearing the noise, Beligaju, who was propping up his face with one hand, lazily raised his eyes. His ice-cold eyes were as clear as a demon's. His tone was as flat as indifferent as before. How is it? Reporting to your highness, no one has approached young Master He. Shadow respectfully lowered his eyes and reported without missing a word. But the strange thing is that young Master He's carriage never left the city. Instead, he stayed in an inn, as if he's waiting for someone. As Bailey Jiaoju listened, his slender fingertips tapped on the tabletop. This seemed to be a common action when he was thinking. Within the elegance was a sense of self-restraint. No need to keep an eye on her, she won't go look for Hazy again. No need again. Shadow was becoming more and more unable to figure out his own master's routine. However, for the sake of insurance, he still felt that he should raise an opinion. Perhaps it's not time yet. Could it be that Miss Hellion is waiting for us to withdraw our troops? After all, she had played this trick before, creating a diversion to the east and attacking the west. She won't. Beligaju pushed the teacup in his hand, his thin lips demonically cold. That little fox has never fought an uncertain battle. No matter how much bait is placed, as soon as she senses danger, her first reaction is to stay away. She didn't appear in Hayz's surroundings all night. That means that she's already guessed a few things. For example, in this game, who was the hunter and who was the prey? But the prey he chose this time was especially disobedient. Beligaju slowly tightened his grip on the teacup, so tight that even the surrounding air cooled down. A few things. Shadow always felt that his master's words were a bit hard to fathom. Beligaju didn't explain much. He only continued to ask in an indifferent tone. Aside from Hazy, did anything else happen in the city? Nothing else. It's just that a fairy appeared recently. She's even more beautiful than that #1 woman. The more Shadow spoke, the softer his voice became because His Highness had always been uninterested in these things. Beligaju first sneered, then closed his eyes and planned to continue to rest. Shadow knew that this would be the result. He rubbed his nose and planned to leave. But then he saw Beligaju suddenly open his eyes. Those eyes were so bright that it was almost frightening. Fairy. No wonder she couldn't be found at any of the city gates. How could he forget that she originally had a layer of skin on her body? But this kind of feeling of letting other people spy on his prey really didn't make him happy. Shadow still didn't know what happened to His Highness. On the other side, Belagaju had already stood up with a smile that wasn't a smile. His long sleeves fluttered, bringing out a bone-piercing cold wind. Go prepare the carriage. Immediately enter the city. Yes. As a well-trained shadow, at any time, he would accept orders without a change in expression. Just like now, he didn't understand why His Highness suddenly decided to enter the city. Dispatch all the shadow guards. Belagaju's voice rang out again, colder than ever before. Unhurriedly, he paused between each word, as if he was grinding through his lips. Capture that girl who's as beautiful as a fairy. This time, Shadow really stared blankly for a moment. His eyes blinked. What did His Highness mean? Not capturing that Miss Hellion, but capturing a fairy instead? Who could tell him what was going on? Hellion Vivian also wanted to know what was going on. Originally, everything was fine. She was still planning whether or not to spend some money to hire a few maids to disguise herself out of the city. How did so many shadow guards suddenly appear, specifically picking beautiful girls to make their move? It made her really think that she was a little mouse on the street. She hid here and there in a very sorry state. Woman, they're here. The white cat coldly stood on the high roof. From far away, it saw that carriage belonging to the imperial family. It lowered its head and met Hellion Vivian's gaze. Its eyes flashed with a never-before-seen worry. Chapter 108. On the main street. A carriage as tall as a person was slowly moving forward. Countless black-clothed cavalrymen were guarding the front and back of the carriage. Hellion Vivian turned around, her back against the wall. She made a hand gesture to the white cat, indicating that it should enter the Fairyland space first. She leaned to the side and looked in the direction of the carriage. Her back was slightly shaken. It seems that this third prince really wanted to catch her. He actually came in person. What should we do now? Yuan Ming's eyes narrowed. He also felt that this third prince was very difficult to deal with. Hellion Vivian analyzed the situation. We can't meet force with force. Woman, do you know what this means? I can sense martial qi all around me. Yuan Ming raised his eyes, his tone cold. This means that we are surrounded. He knows that you are nearby. Let's retreat first. Wei Wei's fingers tightened, her figure beautifully scuttled to another long alley. Yuan Ming looked at the similarly blocked long alley and whistled. It seems that we can't retreat. That man was really ruthless. He didn't even give them a chance to take a small path. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and raised her hand. She was just about to use her martial qi when she heard a suppressed cough. Uncle Liang, what happened outside? That voice was like water. It echoed in the noisy street, as if it could calm all the noise. Hellion Vivian's ears moved. She pulled Yuan Ming to the side and looked at the carriage that stopped at the entrance of the alley. Her eyes flashed with light. The carriage didn't look like much. It was pure white and clean. There weren't any unnecessary decorations. But this kind of carriage was commonly seen in the capital. Any merchant with a little money could afford it. Unlike that rich young master He Zi, the roof of the carriage was painted with a luxurious golden color. However, what Hellion Vivian cared about was the handsome black horse that pulled the carriage. Although it tried very hard to restrain its wings, its owner also very attentively gave it a special saddle. But all of this couldn't fool Hellion Vivian's eyes. That horse wasn't an ordinary horse. It's a black-winged horse. Even Yuan Ming, when he saw the carriage, had a faint look of astonishment on his face. According to reason, it should be hiding in the spirit forest, so how could it be willing to be driven by a human? Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled up as she looked at Yuan Ming with a devilish smile. In the blink of an eye, she was nowhere to be seen. In front of the carriage, a middle-aged servant jumped down from the shaft and bowed towards the curtain of the carriage. His kind face was full of respect. Young master, it's the Imperial Guards. They seem to be searching for someone. Guards of the royal family? A pair of hands that were excessively pale and thin reached out from the carriage with inexplicable strength. They held the curtain of the carriage, and the ivory-white robe fluttered in the wind. A low cough sounded. Just respond politely, don't get into a fight. The middle-aged servant bowed his head and replied respectfully, yes, This old servant will take care of this small matter. Young master, please rest assured. Be careful. A voice that was as clear as water followed the fall of the carriage's curtain. The man turned his head around. Hellion Vivian, who was hiding in the carriage, finally had the chance to see his appearance. That picturesque face was covered with a layer of brilliance. His thin lips were pale due to years of illness, but it didn't affect his bearing. Instead, it added a trace of warmth. The smile on his face was just right. His long and narrow eyes were half-curved, and his eyebrows were like the cold moon. It was inconceivably good-looking. The pure white robe on his body was especially fitting, making him look as if he had just walked out from the moon. You. Hellion Vivian could clearly see that the man's calm eyes flashed with a luster. Sure. Hellion Vivian didn't care about the difference between men and women. Her left hand covered his mouth and smiled faintly. I personally don't like violence, so I ask this young master to cooperate. The man glanced at the dagger that was close to his neck. His expression didn't change as he gently said, "The person that the third prince is looking for is you." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She was surprised by this man's intelligence. At this time, the other carriage had already arrived. Even though it was separated by the curtain, Hellion Vivian could still feel a strong sense of oppression. Hellion Vivian tightened her grip on the dagger in her hand. She was planning to think of another way. That man opened his mouth. With a light cough, he only said 2 words, "Lie down." Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She looked deeply at that man and quickly bent her body. At this time, the curtain of the carriage was suddenly blown up by a cold wind. Hellion Vivian was nestled under the seat. She looked up under the sunlight. She saw that in the distance, someone was walking over step by step. His steps seemed to have been calculated. It was as if he was walking on clouds. Every step repeated the same posture. He looked indifferent and cold, but there was a kind of unstoppable elegance. Hellion Vivian seemed to hear the sound of the carriage wheels cracking. The entire street seemed to be still. Almost everyone looked at this godlike man who was walking down from the carriage. Even their breaths were suppressed in their throats. Hellion Vivian subconsciously shrank her body. Until the other person walked closer, so close that they were only separated by a thin layer of the carriage. He had the most noble temperament that Hellion Vivian had ever seen. In the light, he constantly seeped out a kind of provocative power. Hellion Vivian quickly held her breath. When Beligaju looked in this direction, his deep black eyes were indifferent to everything. It was as if even if the entire street went crazy because of him, it wouldn't affect his thoughts. Beligaju glanced inside the carriage. Then, his gaze fell on the man who was coughing lightly and smiling. That man didn't get off the carriage. He only bowed his head politely. He was as gentle as jade. "This commoner greets your highness." "Young master." Uncle Liang wanted to stand over, but he was fixed in the distance by the man's gaze. Beligaju's gaze didn't change at all. His tone was indifferent. "It's a routine matter." Hellion Wei, who was lying on her stomach in the car, chuckled, her face ashen. "Routine business?" The third prince was indeed black-bellied to the point of death. It was clear that he had turned the world upside down in order to catch her, but when it came out of his mouth, it had become a serious matter of routine business. This made it so that even if the people of the 4 great clans wanted to complain to the retired emperor, they would not be able to obtain any benefits. "Let go." Beligaju's voice sounded again. Hellion Vivian swore that there was never a time like this where she felt that the third prince's voice was so pleasant to hear. But she just wanted to get up. Then, she heard Beligaju say, "Wait a minute." Chapter 109. Hellion Vivian suddenly stiffened. She didn't have time to react. Fortunately, the man moved to the side and the corner of his white robe blocked her view. She gently coughed. "Your Highness, is there anything else?" Beligaju curved his thin lips. Even if he was questioning, he still gave people a kind of well-educated elegance. Not now. Not knowing why, Hellion Vivian secretly broke out in a cold sweat for her actions just now. This third prince, he wanted to trick her again. Fortunately, the sickly invalid's reaction was fast enough and his acting skills were good enough. Otherwise, ordinary people really wouldn't be able to deal with that man. Helene Vivian breathed a sigh of relief and lay down on the ground. With one hand supporting her chin, she didn't care about her image at all. Then, this commoner will take his leave. The man reached out and put down the curtain. He lowered his head and looked at her. His voice was faint as he said to the outside of the carriage, "Uncle Liang, let's go." The city gates opened and the carriage wheels rolled over the ground inch by inch. Helene Vivian heard a cry of alarm. "Your Highness." It was Shadow. He extended his hand, wanting to support the dizzy Bailey Jiaoju. However, she was stopped by Bailey Jiaoju's gaze. "Your Highness." Although it was only a touch, the warmth that came from his master's body already showed how bad his current condition was. However, none of them could see it. His Highness was so strong that he would never show a trace of weakness in front of others. Even now, he only used his finger to press his forehead. His long eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and his voice was cold as he ordered, "Continue to search." "But your body." The worry in Shadow's eyes was unintentional. Since that big fire, His Highness's body had a lot of problems. Each one of them was enough to take his life. However, Bailey Jiaoju only leisurely turned his own ring. "I said, continue searching." "Yes." Shadow respectfully lowered his eyes. He raised his hand and led the rest of the shadow guards into the streets of the capital. When there was no one around, the fire Chelene opened its mouth from the fantasy space. "Master, you need to rest." That horse just now was a black-wind horse. Beligaju's tone was indifferent, as if he was just stating a fact. The fire Chelene lowered its head. "Nothing can escape Master's eyes." "I didn't." Beligaju raised his head, and the light in his eyes dimmed a little. "It's a little restless. It has sensed your presence." The fire Chelene jumped up. "Master, your eyes." "I can't see for the time being." Beligaju's voice was still lukewarm, as if the blind person wasn't him. The fire Chelene furrowed its thick eyebrows. Just like what it had said before, that fire had brought too much harm to its master. Master had also encountered such a situation before. The longest was 3 days, the shortest was 1 day. It was just that the time interval seemed to be getting shorter and shorter. He didn't know if this situation was good or bad. No matter what, the most important thing now was to not let anyone notice that something was wrong with Master. Helene Vivian, who was lying in the carriage, looked behind her. There was an unknown light in her eyes, as if there was something strange. "If you regret it, you can get out of the carriage now." The man's voice was very gentle, but it revealed a hint of sickness. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. Regret? She just felt that she had an unfair advantage. If it was the third prince under normal circumstances, he would have definitely discovered her hiding in the carriage. It seemed that sometimes good luck was the key to a decisive battle. Although her current body wasn't as good as the third prince's. Helene Vivian leaned against the soft cushion, and her eyes were full of fatigue. Everyone wants to marry into the royal family. The man looked at her appearance, and his lips revealed a faint smile. His voice was low like flowing water, as if he was just stating a fact. His dark blue hair was like a brocade draped over his shoulders. Above his collar was a jade-like face that could topple all living things. His star-like eyebrows were like the first melting snow in spring. He was both happy and angry, and forcibly suppressed the light in the carriage. This kind of man made people feel that just looking at him would taint him, but they couldn't control themselves from wanting to get closer. Helene Vivian sized up the white-clothed man in front of her again. She saw that he was sitting there indifferently, and had a lonely temperament. It was as if he didn't do anything, and a cool breeze would come by. It wasn't that Helene Vivian had never met this kind of person. On the surface, he looked very weak, but in reality, he had the ability to reverse the universe. In the Dragon War Empire, he was the only one who fit this image. It was him, the second-ranked Lianqing family, Gongzi Wu Shuang. It was said that although the Lianqing family wasn't in the 4 great families, they were one of the most noble and most mysterious families in the Dragon War Empire. They were closely related to the Bailey family, and were of the same breadth and branch. Although they were few in number, every one of them were geniuses who knew how to make armaments. Among them, the eldest son of the Lianqing family, Jing Wushuang, was the most outstanding. When he was young, he was unanimously recognized as the successor of the Lianqing family. The Lianqing family's hereditary position was only based on ability, not seniority. To be able to become the patriarch, he must be able to command the fate of the entire family. Therefore, putting aside those armaments that he made, just based on the fact that he was able to obtain the approval of the Lianqing family, it wasn't hard to imagine that this man's ability was deep and immeasurable. "Miss, where do you plan to go next?" The man casually flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand. In the center of the carriage, there was still a teapot. Inside the teapot, there was warm tea. Steam rose in spirals, emitting a faint fragrance. He faced Hellion Vivian and smiled. Although he was tired, it didn't affect his elegance in the slightest. It was as if an immortal had walked out from a painting. Wei originally wanted to threaten this guy and directly take her to the armament convention. In any case, he, Jing Wushuang, as the president's son, was also the highlight of this time's armament convention. He would certainly appear at the convention. But now, seeing that the man wasn't resisting and had even helped her so much, Hellion Vivian was too embarrassed to say her bellyful of vicious words. She could only say, "After we cross that mountain in front, put me down." The Black Wind Horse's speed was very fast. In a short while, it spread its wings and flew over a mountain. After that, the man looked towards Hellion Vivian, who was sitting next to him, and lightly coughed twice. "Miss, shouldn't you get off the carriage? A single man and a single woman, don't ruin Miss's reputation." Hellion Vivian also wasn't a thick-skinned person. She also more or less understood the other party's meaning. He was afraid that she would seize the opportunity to latch onto him. Ancient people were more complex than modern people thought. Not even 20 years old, yet they thought that all the women in the world were close to him because they coveted something from him. Hellion Vivian smiled. Stretching her body, she casually threw 10 taels of silver on the table. "This is a gift of thanks. Thank you, young Master Jing, for helping me smooth things over. Goodbye." She had just called him young Master Jing. Chapter 110. Truly a smart girl. Jing Wushuang raised her eyes, a light flashed through her usually warm eyes. Hellion Vivian had already jumped off the carriage. Suddenly having such a person come out of the carriage gave the servant driving the carriage a big fright. When Uncle Liang turned his head to look, he saw that the girl's complexion was fine, her features were delicate and pretty, and her long black curly hair hung straight to her waist. She was so beautiful that people were reluctant to look away. He hurriedly tightened the reins, his old face filled with shock. "Young master, just now. The person that the third prince was looking for, it couldn't be her, right?" His master clearly knew, but still hid her in the carriage. If this was found out by the third prince. Uncle Liang wiped his cold sweat. Even if their family was large, they still had to give face to the imperial family. The young master really wasn't afraid of anything. However, this girl hid really well. The whole way here, he actually didn't detect anything strange at all. "Uncle Liang." Jing Wushuang's gentle voice interrupted his words. Her pair of clear eyes were as deep as the sea, suffused with a faint blue, as if she could drown a person. Then, the corners of his mouth curved into a gentle arc. He extended his jade-like fingers and picked up the silver that Hellion Vivian threw on the table. "How many people have you seen that the third prince couldn't find after searching for an entire day and night?" Uncle Liang stared blankly. He had long heard of that prince's great reputation. Even if he lost his martial chi, no one dared to challenge his anger. No matter how arrogant the 4 great clans were, in front of him, even if they were unwilling, they still had to restrain their flames. One could imagine that prince's methods. Whatever he wanted to do, no one could stop him. Even the retired emperor was the same. Like today, searching for a person for an entire day with no results. 1. Uncle Liang flipped through his memories before answering. This old servant has only seen one. And the other person was even a girl. Jing Wushuang put away the silver in her palm and smiled faintly. It seems that the Hellion family's trash isn't as useless as the rumors say. Just now, that was the Hellion family's good-for-nothing young lady. Uncle Liang suddenly opened his mouth wide. How is that possible? Didn't they all say that the eldest daughter of the Helian family was tall and sturdy, with dark skin, and a debauchy vulgar manner that couldn't even compare to a village girl? That's why the heir of the Murong family couldn't help but break off the engagement. However, when he looked at that girl just now, even though it was only a glance, he saw the side of the other party's face. She was absolutely a beauty in the making. Jing Wushuang put her hand to her lips and coughed twice. When she opened her mouth again, she said in an indifferent tone, "Nothing is impossible. Rumors in the marketplace are nothing more than idle gossip. Let's hurry up." Yes. It took Uncle Liang quite a while to come back to his senses. He raised his whip thoughtfully. Now that he thought about it, this was the first time the young master had taken the initiative to help someone. Could it be because that Helian family's eldest daughter wasn't caught by third prince? Uncle Liang couldn't read his master's mind. At the same time, Eunuch Sun couldn't figure out what His Highness was thinking. It had almost been 1 night and 2 days, but His Highness hadn't closed his eyes for a moment. Wasn't this kind of method too ruthless to himself? Those shadow guards outside had withdrawn, but it was very obvious that His Highness hadn't given up on the matter of capturing Miss Helian. Just by looking at Elder Ji Zun's green face, one could understand the cause and effect. Humph. Don't count on me telling you the whereabouts of my dear disciple. Eunuch Sun raised his head and looked at the ceiling. Oh my God, Elder Ji Zun had already repeated this sentence no less than 3 times. Yet Bailey Jiaoju didn't even spare him a glance. He only leisurely drank his tea as his hand played with the top-notch armament components. These treasures could only be found in the Ghost Palace. It was enough to make all of the armament masters in the world itch for them. Elder Ji Zun licked his lips enviously and negotiated. I say, icy brat, why do you insist on looking for my dear disciple? She just didn't cooperate with your act. Do you need to be so ruthless? Beligaju didn't speak. He only propped up his chin and looked down at Elder Ji Zun, who was tied up into a ball. His gaze was colder than ever. If Fire Chelin didn't know that his current master couldn't see anything, he would have thought that his master was exerting pressure on Elder Ji Zun. Elder Ji Zun indeed felt the pressure, but for the sake of his dear disciple, he must hold on. Just as Elder Ji Zun planned to heroically sacrifice himself for his disciple, Beligaju's indifferent voice slowly transmitted over, even if you don't say it, I will still find out where she went. Elder Ji Zun was stunned. What did this mean? Call Nangong Lai over. Beligaju absent-mindedly asked the servant at the side. Elder Ji Zun blew his beard. It's over, it's over. The priest's divination was usually the most accurate under normal circumstances. Although Nangong Lai couldn't divine his disciple's specific location, he could predict north, south, east, west, and related events. When the time came, relying on this icy brat's brain, he would definitely quickly figure out where his dear disciple went. Shadow lowered his eyes and glanced at the slightly impatient Elder Ji Zun. After that, he said, Your Highness, I'm afraid the matter of finding Miss Helian will have to be put aside for a while. The people from the 4 great clans have all arrived. Right now they're in the main hall. They want to ask Your Highness about some things that happened at White Academy. They came with ill intentions. Elder Ji Zun stood up and was about to speak for Beligaju. Yet he saw that person carelessly brush the corner of his robe. His eyes didn't blink as he paced back and forth. A light breeze blew his long sleeves, rolling up traces of evil spirit. Fire Chelin shook his head. These humans were really stupid. They just had to pick a time when Master wasn't happy to come out and jump around. Bang! The wind rolled and the doors and windows closed. The precious marble reflected the luxurious palace hall. The clan leaders of the 4 great clans all wore incomparably pure and holy robes. Their whole bodies swelled with an unending stream of martial qi. Behind them stood each family's successor. Murong Chang Feng was among them. His handsome face seemed to carry a never-before-seen sense of superiority. Every time the clan leaders of the 4 great clans came to the palace, they would inevitably put forward a lot of proposals. The emperor coveted beauty and easily listened to slander. The only thing to be thankful for was that the one who made the decisions in the palace wasn't him. Instead, it was the retired emperor. Since ancient times, White Academy has always been a place that pays the most attention to peace. How could they dispatch shadow guards there? This clearly violated the Academy's taboo. White Academy's taboo is to prohibit the use of privileges to harm students. His Highness didn't harm anyone. Fierce voices echoed under the dome. The dispute between the two sides was in full swing. The person in question, third Prince Beligaju, was only sitting in his own seat. That mysterious and unfathomable face was turned sideways. His right hand was supporting his chin, absent-minded. Chapter 111. Seeing him like this, the clan leaders of the 4 great clans were unbearably angry. The retired emperor also felt that his own precious imperial grandson was too excessive. He lightly coughed twice. "Old third, tell us, what are you thinking in the end?" Beligaju lowered his eyes, his eyelashes drooping down like a crow's wing. Wearing white gloves, his slender fingers rested on the chair, rhythmically tapping. It was very obvious that he was thinking about other things. The clan leaders glared at Beligaju's side profile with an indignant expression that said, "Retired emperor, look at him." Eunuch's son, who was standing to the side, had no choice but to use the horsetail whisk in his hand to nudge his master. Bailey Jiao finally lifted his eyelids and slightly raised his eyebrows. Eunuch's son immediately whispered, "Your Highness, the retired emperor is calling for you." "Your Highness." One of the clan leaders of the 4 great clans took a step forward, his voice loud and clear. "Regarding the matter of dispatching troops at White Academy, shouldn't you give us a reasonable explanation?" Beligaju absent-mindedly raised his head and glanced at him. That pair of deep eyes made people's scalps go numb. The people who were looked at trembled from head to toe and suddenly had an impulse to retreat. However, this time they were jointly entering the palace, so the third prince wouldn't really dare to do anything to them. "Heh!" At this moment, Beligaju laughed. His voice was very light, but it was difficult to conceal his innate grace and magnificence. A large number of winged beasts appeared, and even a fire chileen appeared. Elder Nai's meaning is for me to look on helplessly as the students are captured. That clan leader stared blankly. This isn't right. At that time, Your Highness dispatched troops to capture that hellion. Elder Nai. Beligaju leisurely interrupted the clan leader's words. "I only dispatched troops after receiving the news that there was something strange in Spirit Forest. As for the search for Hellion Vivian, it was only a matter of convenience." That clan leader was thoroughly stupefied and turned his head to look at Emperor Murong. Was it like this? Why was this completely different from the information he had received? Murong Wang's expression also stiffened, and so did Su Jiaocheng. They looked at each other in dismay and thought of many ways, but they didn't expect that the third prince would actually directly tell them. He dispatched his troops to suppress the divine beast and protect the students. If that was the case, how were they supposed to ask? The patriarchs were all irritable, so much so that the hall, which was originally filled with endless arguments, suddenly became blank. Eunuch's son's expression changed from time to time as he listened. In the end, he had no choice but to worship Beligaju with an extremely admiring gaze. The only one who could lie so confidently was his master. Nangong Lai, as the youngest priest in the War Dragon Empire, was also standing in the main hall. However, his position was relatively hidden, so no one saw that after he heard Beligaju's words, he almost couldn't hold back his laughter. He did not believe that Arju would mobilize his own shadow guards to protect the students. He was definitely fooling those old fools. Ha 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 ha. Ah lie. The patriarch standing next to him glanced in his direction. In the War Dragon Empire, priests and saintesses were the same. They all had to wear a veil and put on an incomparably holy robe. Therefore, the patriarch could only see the thick veil and couldn't see Nangong Lai's current expression. If he could see, he definitely wouldn't have the idea of dragging Nangong Lai into the water. As the youngest priest in the Nangong family, shouldn't you say a few words? Nangong Lai originally came to watch the show very well. Suddenly being called out like this, and seeing the cold gaze of the person sitting on the seat of honor, it was almost enough to freeze everyone to death. He swallowed his saliva, then looked at the patriarch with a face full of what the fuck. The patriarch thought that his relationship with the Nangong family was not bad. What's more, he also knew that ever since the third prince lost his martial chi, the priest clan no longer respected the third prince as much as before. Therefore, our Lai would definitely stand on his side. Nangong Lai really did want to stand on his side, because if he stood close enough, he could personally strangle him to death. So, what does Lord Priest want to say, Chem? Belagaju slightly raised the last syllable. Nangong Lai's back trembled, the corner of his mouth carrying a wicked smile. Your Highness, our priest clan is only in charge of prophesies. Except for major events, we don't participate in any court politics. Emperor Murong wasn't surprised by Nangong Lai's words. Since ancient times, the priests had been like this, neither fighting nor seizing, but their attitude was presumptuous. They would never nitpick the imperial family's faults, they would only avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. However, since Nangong Lai didn't speak up for the third prince, that also meant that the information he received was correct. The priest clan was no longer as loyal to the imperial family as before. Although they didn't obtain any benefits from the third prince when they entered the palace today, it was still worth it. At the very least, they confirmed a very important matter. However, what Emperor Murong didn't expect was that feelings would often be biased. For example, the relationship between Nangong Lai and Belagaju. That's right, the priest clan was indeed no longer as loyal to the imperial family as before. However, he overlooked that the priest clan's thoughts didn't represent Nangong Lai's thoughts. As the successor of the priest clan, Nangong Lai had already chosen the king he would be loyal to in the future. And that king wouldn't be anyone other than Belagaju. This was the tie between the priest clan and the imperial family. They had been brothers for 10 years. As early as when they first met, the little Nangong Lai was chosen by the similarly young Belagaju from among thousands of priests to be the priest's successor. His fate was sealed. Bang! When the 4 great clans' leaders and successors retreated, even the retired emperor returned to his sleeping quarters. The layers upon layers of palace doors instantly turned into a barrier, not even the slightest sound of wind could be heard. The wicked smile on Nangong Lai's face disappeared. His right hand touched his left shoulder as he slightly saluted, Master. Although the current Belagaju's casual manner was no different from before, standing here, he still had to act. Sure enough, Belagaju lazily lifted his eyelids and raised an eyebrow. You can directly kneel on the ground. Hearing this, Nangong Lai raised his head and stared at Belagaju's ink-black pupils. Just as he wanted to say something, he saw that there wasn't a trace of light in those deep eyes. Nangong Lai stared blankly for a moment. His unrestrained expression suddenly changed. Your eyes. The poison flared up. Belagaju expressionlessly flicked his lapel, his voice indifferent. Nangong Lai's eyes widened. Then why did you come to see that group of old men? Aren't you afraid they'll find out and rebel? Belagaju sneered, no longer needing to conceal his wicked aura. He said each word with a wicked chill, they dare. Chapter 112. Nangong Lai shook off the goosebumps on his body, lightly coughed a few times and said, Recently, many people in the clan have rebelled, and the people under my command have also followed suit. Although I wouldn't be so bold as to come in front of you and throw away my life, I still want to see what kind of state you're in right now, so that I can wait for an opportunity to act. Belagaju quietly listened without speaking. His long sleeves fluttered, and a faintly discernible double image seemed to appear beside him. But Nangong Lai seemed to have seen something he shouldn't have seen. His eyes widened as he heavily took a big step back. You! Nangong Lai's astonishment was obvious. He slowly moved his gaze away from the double image, and then placed it on Belagaju's face. Last night, the fire Chelene didn't appear on its own. Was it summoned by you? Belagaju faintly hummed, his fingertips supporting his forehead, unmoved, still as graceful as a noble. Nangong Lai smiled, his evil aura surging. You clearly hate being involved with anyone the most, but for a woman, you even summoned the fire Chelene back. Arju, don't tell me you're only treating her as your prey. What else? Belagaju raised his eyes, his voice cold. You want to use that set of divination results to fool people again? The Red Phoenix Star movement, Nangong Lai saw the displeased expression in his eyes, leisurely smiled, and changed the topic. I'm only worried that you've played too much, and forgotten the proper business. Since the fire Qilin has returned, then wouldn't all the martial qi in your body be coming back soon? Beligaju didn't pay attention to his words, only his left hand slightly moved, his long sleeves fluttering in the air, graceful and elegant. The barrier disappeared, and Eunuch Sun stood outside the hall with a blank face. Beligaju swept a glance at him, his pair of eyes floating up and down. Invite Grandmaster Zizun over. That old man Zizun is also here? Nangong Lai turned his head and whispered, shouldn't he be busy with the martial qi competition that's coming soon? It's said that if anyone approached him, he would very arrogantly say to them, I don't have time. How could he appear in the palace now? Nangong Lai carried this kind of question. Just as he turned around, he met Grandmaster Zizun's gaze. Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Nangong Lai stared blankly for a moment before bursting into laughter. He laughed so hard that tears were about to come out. He pointed at Grandmaster Zizun with one hand and covered his stomach with the other. Old man, where did you get robbed? These clothes, haha, aren't they too unique? The corners of Zizun's mouth twitched as he snorted coldly. However, it was as if Beligaju didn't see this scene. He politely and gracefully instructed the shadow beside him, untie Grandmaster Zizun. Yes. Shadow bowed his head respectfully. Zizun glared at them. It wasn't easy for him to regain his freedom, but just as he was about to curse them, Beligaju spoke again. I have a headache right now. The imperial physician has just diagnosed that I can't listen to loud noises. Hearing this, Eunuch Sun almost choked to death on his own saliva. When did an imperial physician come to the ghost palace? Master, even if you're lying, you need to have some evidence. Beligaju's expression didn't change as he turned the black jade thumb ring on his hand. If I listen to too much noise, my temper will become very bad, very bad. Therefore, it's best for Grandmaster to think clearly before speaking. His voice was very light, but it carried an ice-cold texture. Zizun thought in his heart, this is fucking threatening me. But, Mommy, his scalp still went numb. I have nothing to say. Zizun turned his face away and said with integrity, I still have the same old words. I won't tell you where my obedient disciple went. Beligaju curved his thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. Then, he unhurriedly stood up from his seat and walked in front of Zizun. He patted Zizun's shoulder as if he was praising him. How come I didn't realize you had such a backbone before? There are many things you didn't realize. Zizun coldly snorted. What? Now you've changed your mind and want to take me as your master? Let me tell you, there's no such possibility. My current disciple is very good. I don't need you, understand? At the same time, the old man, Eunuch Sun, turned around and wiped his cold sweat. Grandmaster Zizun was really courting death. Because he couldn't see, Beligaju's gaze didn't move at all. He only stared at Zizun, and the curve at the corner of his mouth was exceptionally charming and dazzling. I also don't need you. However, I just said that I don't want to hear any noise, a lie. Here. Nangong Lai's body shifted, and he put his hand on Zizun's shoulder. He smiled evilly. Come, old man, let's talk properly. Grandmaster Zizun's eyes fiercely glared. Lie brat, you dare to do this to me. Huff, 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 huff tilde. No matter how hard Grandmaster Zizun tossed and turned, he still couldn't resist the hypnosis technique of the capital's #1 priest. Nangong Lai's hands held the crystal ball that rose between the two of them. He pushed aside the thick white fog, and his eyes flashed. He lifted his eyes and looked towards Beligaju. Hellion Vivian went to the armament convention. Armament convention. Beligaju pondered as he repeated these 4 words. The temperature in his eyes seemed to be cooling down little by little. Nangong Lai didn't sense it in the slightest. He casually leaned his body back. You know, the second most handsome man in the capital, he's the son of the chairman of the armament convention, right? The armament convention this time is different from the ones in the past. In the past, the armament convention was merely to appraise whether or not people had the qualifications to become an armament master. This year, the successor of the Lianqing clan, Wu Shuang, made an astonishing armament. This armament was made from the best materials in the world, but because of its appearance and performance, it can only be used by girls. That's why right now, all of those young ladies from influential families in the entire capital are thinking of how they can take advantage of any opportunity to get into contact with this Jing Wushuang. But what's interesting is that that person is the same as you. He never took the initiative to contact anyone. Even the invitations of the ministers were beautifully declined by him. This year's armament convention should be extremely marvelous. Catcher. Following Nangong Lai's words, the teacup in Belegaju's hand completely shattered into powder. He slowly opened his hand. Those fragments fell little by little from his palm and fell to the ground. The atmosphere in the main hall suddenly froze to the extreme. Even Nangong Lai didn't understand. Why was it that after Arju found out about that woman's whereabouts, he instead seemed to be angry? How could he know that as soon as Belegaju heard the words armament convention, the image of that carriage stopped at the city gate in the early morning flashed through his mind? At that time, that woman was there. Inside that carriage. The reason why he didn't discover her was because Jing Wushuang covered for her. Good, really good. He actually forgot. That little fox didn't have any other skills. She only knew how to attract bees and butterflies. Chiline. Belegaju commanded. That faintly discernible shadow of a beast appeared. Its attitude was respectful. Present. Make some preparations. We're going to Armament City. The ice-like voice reverberated in the middle of the main hall. Layer upon layer, it didn't retreat for a long time. Chapter 113. The next morning, a gentle breeze blew. The world-famous Armament City was located at the peak of Kang Mountain Range. It had the largest armament trading company in the entire Divine Continent. Some people said that the most talented armament masters in the world were all gathered here. Some people also said that here, you didn't know what kind of people you would meet. Perhaps an unremarkable old woman would be able to tell whether an armament was good or bad. To a martial artist, this was, without a doubt, a heaven within a heaven. However, even in heaven, there would be casinos. Place your bets, place your bets. The casino was bustling with noise and excitement. White smoke was sparse, and everywhere was filled with dust that hadn't seen light for a long time. People of all shapes and sizes were all different. Some were standing, some were sitting, and some were staring at the dice cup on the table that was about to open. Their mouths were shouting, small, small, small. The corners of the mouth of the person holding the dice cup slightly curled as he reached out and opened it. Damn! Why is it big again? A person wearing a white brocade wiped the sweat on his forehead. With one look, one could tell that he was the kind of person who had red eyes from losing. He gripped the fine silver in his hand and loudly shouted, "I don't believe in this evil. I'll bet small, continue to bet small." The person whose eyes were red from losing was none other than Armament City's famous hedonistic little tyrant. His appearance was delicate and pretty, and he was originally only 16 or 17 years old. Two shallow dimples hung on his cheeks. He was simply the modern world's top student of high school. As he spoke, he only heard a bang sound. He reached out and pressed the fine silver on the small sign. Unexpectedly, a paper fan suddenly blocked his hand. "This brother, are you sure you want to bet small?" Hearing this, the little tyrant turned his head and looked over. He only saw a young master in a painting appear in front of him. That person was very handsome, with a fair face. His phoenix eyes were slightly raised, and they were dyed with a faint evil aura. "Why do you care which one I bet on?" The person with red eyes from losing was vexed. What he hated the most was this kind of good-looking person with a steady temperament. His words also became impolite. However, what he didn't expect was that that person only looked at him with a smile. She reached out and put away the paper fan, then with a turn of her wrist, she pressed the fine silver on the big sign in front of that person. The little tyrant, whose eyes had turned red from losing, frowned. She turned around and fiercely glared at her. "Place your bets. Place your bets." The voice of the dealer who was shaking the dice cup was surprisingly pleasant to the ears. As he waved his long sleeves, The dice cup was shaken in a daze. Finally, there was a loud bang. "Take the cup and open it. Small, 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 give me a small one." When the little tyrant's handsome face said the word daddy, it would always give people a different kind of comical feeling. 5, 5, 4, big. The banker swiftly announced. Then, he took the money and split it in half before pushing the jade-like young master away. The young master held the silver pieces, and the smile on his face deepened. Following that, the little tyrant bet small, and she bet big. The little tyrant was betting big, so she was betting small. In any case, he was the exact opposite of the little tyrant who had lost so much that his eyes were red. After a dozen or so rounds, the noble young master's money grew more and more, while the little tyrant lost everything. At this moment, little tyrant had also sensed something. In the end, he stopped betting and watched as that noble young master bet. Every single round, was won by him. Gradually, the little tyrant's handsome face turned from annoyance to admiration. In the end, he even widened his mouth in amazement. As though he had achieved the effect he wanted, that noble young master kept the money on the table, raised his paper fan, and planned to leave. Little tyrant immediately followed after him. Not only him, even those bodyguards who were serving him behind him took another glance in astonishment, and hurriedly ran off. That young master placed his fan on the side of his leg, and lazily yawned. As though he had sensed that someone was following behind him, he did not point it out. Only, the smile on his face was tinged with traces of shrewdness. Seeing that the person was about to leave, little tyrant shouted loudly with a red face. "Hey!" That young master curved his thin lips, and then turned his head. "Is something the matter?" Cough. Little tyrant placed his hand next to his lips. Most likely, he was planning to make himself look more mature, as even his voice was suppressed to an extremely low volume. "How do you know when to bet big and when to bet small?" That young master smiled, and his eyes were picturesque. "Haven't you heard of the saying, out of 10 bets, 1 is cheating?" Of course, this young master has heard of it. The handsome young man coldly snorted, and then glanced at that young master. He was extremely proud. It's just that this young master still doesn't know how to use it. Saying that he doesn't know in such a righteous manner, this is really enough. Young Master Gooey's feet slipped, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Hey!" When the handsome young man spoke, he would always give people an extremely exquisite handsomeness. "If you teach me everything you know, this young master will give you a lot of money. How about it?" He had to learn these things, so that when he saw that person again, he wouldn't lose every single time. No one knew that when the handsome young man lowered his eyes, the killing intent that flashed past the corner of his eyes was something that should not be present at his age. "I don't want money." The noble young master's voice slowly sounded. "However, I can teach you for free what out of 10 bets, 9 is cheating means." "Oh!" The handsome young man raised his eyebrows and also laughed. "That's actually very interesting. How do you plan on teaching this young master?" The noble young master took a step forward, his thin lips carrying a meaningful taste. "In 2 days, young Master Wu Shuang will hold a small test here in order to find a suitable owner for that armament of his. Right now, many people are certain that Helian Jiawa will definitely win." "Helian Jiawa?" The handsome young man absent-mindedly tightened his pupils. "The number 1 beauty in the capital who has been designated to be the 3rd prince's consort?" The noble young master raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's right, it's her." And then, the handsome young man slowly opened his mouth. "Don't tell me there's someone more powerful than her?" The noble young master's thin lips raised. "Of course there's someone. For example?" The handsome young man narrowed his eyes. The noble young master smiled. "Helian Vivian. That good for nothing?" The handsome young man intuitively wrinkled his eyebrows. The noble young master touched the bridge of his nose. Ari, he didn't expect that her reputation would be so big. Even the son of the city lord, who was far away in Armament City, knew her. That's right, this elegant noble young master was none other than the Helian Vivian who had spent all the money she had to rush to Armament City. She stood there with delicate features and an outstanding temperament. Although she, who was dressed as a man, didn't give people the feeling of being incomparably stunning as the female lead, relying on her appearance, she was already at the level of being gentle and elegant like Jade. Walking in the crowd, she could attract the attention of many young girls. "Why aren't you talking?" The handsome young man suspiciously raised his eyebrows. Hellion Vivian lightly coughed and then said, "It's because everyone thinks that Hellion Vivian is a good-for-nothing that when the time comes, we'll be able to earn more money." Chapter 114. It's actually a good idea. After the beautiful young man heard all of Hellion Vivian's plans, he revealed his canine teeth at the corner of his mouth. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile on her face, as if she was waiting for him to make a decision. That beautiful young man raised his eyebrows and sized her up with a glance. After that, he slowly said, "Guards, listen to my orders. Cooperate with this person's actions. This young master wants to set up his own gambling house." Just like that, on the second day, Armament City welcomed the largest-scale gambling house. The gambling house was set up on one side of the armament assembly. One after another, people from the armament school entered the arena. The bets outside were also getting bigger and bigger. Those who bet on Hellion Jiao's victory came one after another. It was packed to the brim. A carriage rolled over the jade-green ground. The wheels were made of the most low-key luxurious silver-white color. Just like that, it stopped at the roadside, as if it had occupied all of the elegance. "Master." The voice of the person driving the carriage was very low. His handsome face was exposed under the sunlight. Looking carefully, his hair was actually somewhat red. Even his pupils seemed to have a red light flashing through when he lowered his eyes. "We've arrived. Enter." It was only a short 2 words, but it gave people a kind of irresistible ice-cold. Separated by the carriage curtain, no one knew who was inside the carriage. They could only faintly see a tall and straight figure. His slender fingers were leisurely turning the pinky ring on his little finger, full of an ascetic aura. Coachman lowering his head, his thin lips hooked up. He respectfully responded, "Yes." In the field, the cross-dressing Hellion Vivian extended her hand to support her chin. Her fingers played back and forth with the paper fan in the center of her palm. The more people who bet on Hellion Jiao, the wider the smile on the corner of her mouth. "This time, I can actually make a huge profit." When the white cat heard this, it was very disapproving. However, it couldn't help but admire this woman's ability to make money. Looks like escaping from White Academy this time was really the right choice. Hellion Vivian's slender legs were slightly crossed. Without any restraints, she looked more free and easy than when she was in the capital. She curved her thin lips and said with an evil aura, "No one bet on me winning. Xiao Bai, you go and bet these 100 taels of silver on my side. The more you buy, the more you win. I can't transform into a human, how can I go?" The white cat raised its eyebrows coldly. Hellion Vivian smiled shrewdly. "I just saw a black wind horse helping its master choose a side. There seems to be a lot of divine beasts here. That's because there's a world-class armament master here." The white cat glanced at her. "So, you must be careful during the competition." Hellion Vivian blinked and didn't say anything else. Not far away, a pair of deep eyes looked condescendingly at the master and servant who were whispering downstairs. A glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. The man's figure was very good. His legs were slender and powerful. His upper body was tall and straight. His white clothes fluttered in the wind. Just by sitting there quietly, he emitted an oppressive aura. He held a cup of tea in his hand. His fingertips that stayed on the cup inadvertently increased their strength. Those 2 sexy thin lips were not tainted with the slightest trace of lust, like an immortal from the 9th heaven. The coachman standing by his side laughed. A red light flashed in his eyes. "Master, wait for me. I'll go and help you catch the prey right now." The man glanced sideways. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were cold. The coachman paused and retracted his steps. No matter how he looked at that expression, it was terrifying. The coachman's scalp went numb and he lightly licked his lower lip. The man leisurely sipped his tea and said without any expression, "Follow the white cat." You bet on whoever it bet on. Bet on 10 times the amount. Yes. The coachman accepted the order in a low voice. However, he didn't understand why his master was doing this. The man only looked at the figure dressed as a man below the stage. The corners of his mouth slowly pulled open into a charming and evil smile. Achoo! Hellion Vivian rubbed her arms and looked left and right. She didn't know why, but from the beginning, her back was a little cold. Could it be that she was wearing too little? Wait, she had to quickly finish her makeup and put on a set of clothes. Ari, she was going to become a black coal ball again. Just as Hellion Vivian was sighing, the white cat came back. It walked over and said in a faint voice, I just looked at the list. So far, only you have bet on you. Very good. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips in satisfaction. She seemed to be able to see all the silvers growing wings and flying towards her. Life couldn't be better. When the people saw the list, they all laughed out loud. There are actually people who bet on that trash to win. Ah, there must be something wrong with their heads. Hearing this, the responsible coachman turned his head and looked at his master. He saw that his master still had a cold expression, as if he didn't hear those people's words. Sometimes, as an ancient mythological beast, he really couldn't guess what his master was thinking. Time passed quickly, and the organizers had already taken their seats on the judging platform one after another. The most eye-catching person at the banquet was the peerless young master in white, Liancheng Wushuang. His side profile looked more cultured and elegant than ever before. His every movement carried a faint elegance. Just by sitting there, he attracted everyone's attention. This included the Hellion Jiaowa. Today, she was wearing a white and pink gauze dress. The collar was made of the finest fox fur. Her small oval face carried a smile. When her eyes fell on Jing Wushuang, she remembered what the servant girl had said to her before. Her beautiful eyes carried a delicate charm. This young Master Wushuang was indeed very attractive. Being adored by such a man made the Hellion Jiaowa feel even more confident. Even the corners of her mouth rose a little. The Hellion Jiaowa's figure was like a willow. Her steps were like a lotus as she stood in the corner. She was shy yet gentle, causing the crowd to exclaim in surprise. The organizer was introducing her Sheng Fang. The Hellion Jiaowa wore a thin veil. She was like a fairy standing in the clouds, enjoying the support of mortals. Suddenly, she seemed to have seen something. Her small face suddenly showed a malicious malevolence. She looked at the crowd. It's her. Hellion Vivian. So this cheap woman really came. She thought that those gambling games were just a joke. After all, ever since Hellion Vivian left White Academy, she had already thought that this cheap woman was dead. Since she was still haunting like a ghost, then she would ruthlessly humiliate this cheap woman today, so that she could understand the difference between a person and a person. The Hellion Jiaowa walked over like a lotus. Her red lips slightly raised. Her voice was crisp like a warbler's. Big sister, I didn't expect to meet you here. Is young Master He also with you? You left the academy in the middle of the night and didn't think about your family's reputation. Father will also follow and make things difficult. Hellion eldest sister? Who was that? The capital's biggest joke. Not to mention that she didn't have an ounce of martial qi, she was still not stable even after the engagement was broken off. She forcibly relied on her thick skin to curry favor with Grandmaster Zizun. Did she really think that by becoming Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, she could identify martial cultivators? Ridiculous. Chapter 115. Hellion Vivian stood in the middle of these 10,000 people's disdainful gazes. Her eyes glittered and her face was indifferent, as if she didn't care the least bit about the people's discussions. Her pair of clear eyes slowly swept all around and finally landed on Hellion Jiaowa's body. Home! Have you forgotten that I've long been removed from the Hellion clan by you and that ungrateful father of yours? This Hellion eldest miss is really boorish. Look at younger sister, then look at older sister. Just based on their appearances, you can tell who's good and who's evil. Come on, how good can a person who escaped from the academy in the middle of the night be? Listening to everyone's discussions, Helian Jiawa lowered her head and pretended to use a handkerchief to wipe the corners of her eyes. I know that eldest sister hates me. As she spoke, she slowly withdrew her gaze from Helian Vivian's body. Once again, she put on an understanding appearance and bashfully smiled at everyone. Everyone, don't talk about eldest sister like that. She's only angry. It's all my fault. As expected, she once again provoked a round of praises for being beautiful and kind. Helian Vivian uninterestedly curled her vermilion lips. Acting one way in front of people, acting another way behind people. Helian Jiawa wasn't tired of this kind of trick, but she was tired of seeing it. Helian Jiawa pinched her handkerchief and said hesitantly, "But eldest sister hasn't even come into contact with armaments. Why would you come to the armaments convention? Did you deliberately come to make your presence known? If it's really like this, younger sister advises eldest sister to stop." Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes and looked at the expressions of the people below the stage. As expected, there was a bit more disdain. Those gazes that fell on her were like looking at a bedbug in a ditch, emitting a strong sense of disdain. She completely didn't care and slowly smiled, calm and composed. Stop. She still hadn't earned any money, why would she stop? Hazy also didn't know that Helian Vivian would appear here. After all, when they were discussing this, there simply wasn't this segment. At that time, they had only said that they would bring their own martial cultivation to the auction house to auction. That was why He-Eyes had been camping at the auction for the past 2 days. After waiting for half a day, he still didn't see his partner. He even thought that the other party wouldn't appear. He hadn't expected that she would actually come here directly to participate in the armament tests. He-Eyes furrowed his brows and stared unblinkingly at the activity on the stage with a serious expression. Even the page boy beside him was not used to it. On the other hand, the guard sitting in the other private room raised his eyebrows worriedly. "Young master, this bet is too big. If this Helian Vivian can't win, then..." "I see." The beautiful young man sitting on the seat of honor acted as if he didn't hear the guard's words and muttered to himself, "Is it a disguise? It doesn't look like it." The guard's eyes flashed. Disguise. What their Gudu family was most proficient in was disguise techniques, and the young master's disguise technique was one of the best in the entire Dragon War Empire. No matter who the other party was, no matter what kind of disguise they made, the young master would always be able to see through their authenticity in the first moment. That beautiful young man seemed to have encountered an extremely interesting matter. His long and narrow eyes were bright and somewhat cold. I really didn't expect that the Helian family's good-for-nothing ugly girl's original appearance was like that. Hehe, interesting, really interesting to the extreme. That guard was increasingly unable to understand what his family's young master was saying. However, what made him apprehensive was the light in the young master's eyes. That kind of pondering, as if he had found a toy that caught his eye. And the thing that caught the young master's eye, under normal circumstances, only had one end, and that was to be destroyed. This point was really inherited from the people on that side. However, compared to that highness, the young master was still considered cute. At least when he couldn't get what he wanted, he would just let it go after throwing a tantrum. And that highness, his thoughts were deep, and not many people could escape from him. When he was young, the young master was miserably tricked by that highness. The guard silently turned his head and glanced again at the beautiful young man with an exquisite appearance. He didn't know whether or not the young master still bore a grudge against that highness for wearing women's clothing. What? The beautiful young man knocked on the table. His long and narrow eyes raised and swept a glance at the guard. That guard thought about how to phrase it and then said, "This subordinate received news from the Imperial Palace." When he heard the 2 words Imperial Palace, the beautiful young man's back slightly shook. He coldly smiled and curved his lips. "Continue." "That highness seems to have also come." The guard raised his head and looked at the sky. "Right now, I don't know whether or not he has entered the city. However, he should be traveling secretly. He didn't bring a single shadow guard with him." Boom. That beautiful young man grabbed the guard's collar and pulled him over. His voice lowered very, very low. "Find an opportunity to capture him. Young master, that is His Highness the Prince." The guard wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He thought to himself that even if you guys are cousins, you still can't be so insolent. The beautiful young man's eyes narrowed again and again. Don't be afraid. Listen to this young master. Get him. Since ancient times, Armament City was different from other cities. Because it had a special status, this place was also not under the control of the imperial family. In short, the beautiful young man only wanted to express one meaning, and that was that this was their territory. Whoever they wanted to capture could be captured. The guard thought for a moment and said, "You should still think about it. Right now, your body still hasn't recovered. It's not suitable to directly confront His Highness the Prince. No need to think about it." The beautiful young man revealed two beautiful canine teeth. That year, when he tricked me into wearing women's clothing, he also didn't think about it. This young master will say it again. Get him. Right now, he doesn't even have a bit of martial chi. It's very convenient to make a move. The guard coughed heavily. He especially wanted to say, "Young master, this is an unfair victory." But when he thought about it, young master and that His Highness were competing to see who was more shameless when they were young. Yes. In the end, the guard accepted the order. The beautiful young man smiled and solemnly instructed, "Capture him alive." The guard, this, no one would dare to kill His Highness. All right, you can withdraw. This young master still wants to continue watching the show. The beautiful young man waved his hand. The light in his eyes that was looking at Hellion Vivian mixed with a different flavor from the past. Using a man's identity to approach him? This Hellion Vivian was actually very smart. It was just unknown whether she really knew how to distinguish armaments, or whether she was just pretending. In reality, almost everyone thought that Hellion Vivian coming to the armament assembly was a joke. They certainly hadn't forgotten that just a month ago, Hellion Vivian had shamelessly gone to that little armaments test held at the Phoenix building. In the end, she only stayed there for a short while before she was impatiently driven out by Master Tu Lao. Now, in this kind of sacred place where armaments masters gathered, she still dared to come and cause trouble. She was simply throwing away her own face. Chapter 116. Peng. The drum hammer fell. The competitors all returned to their respective positions. As they brushed past each other, Hellion Jiao lowered her voice next to Wei Wei's ear. "If you don't want to lose miserably, I advise you to get the hell out of here as soon as possible. After that, hide in a remote and desolate place and peacefully spend the rest of your life. Otherwise, don't expect yourself to be as lucky as before." Towards this kind of provocation, Hellion Vivian only raised her eyebrows and smiled, carrying a ruffian air that others couldn't grasp. After all, if a dog bites you, you can't bite back, right? Woman, you're being looked down upon again. Yuan Ming's lazy voice transmitted from the space. Hellion Vivian curved her lips and glanced towards the gambling house. "This is the effect I wanted." "What? You're finally going to reveal your true strength?" Yuan Ming became excited. Hellion Vivian looked at the armaments that were slowly being pushed onto the stage not far away. She didn't say anything, but the smile on her lips made Yuan Ming's blood boil. "Young master." Standing behind Jing Wushuang to serve, Liang Bai saw Hellion Vivian's appearance on the stage and a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. That face of hers. Jing Wushuang indifferently grunted. His jade-like handsome face still didn't have the slightest bit of expression. He only took a sip of tea, his eyes indifferently swept towards the woman standing like a pine tree in the middle of the hall and slightly lowered his eyelashes. Liang Bai looked at his young master's lukewarm appearance and thought in his heart that he wasn't as calm as his young master. Looking at Hellion Vivian's face now, he was a bit suspicious that the Pharaoh-like person he had seen before wasn't an illusion. That was a bit too dark, right? Probably because of the color of her skin, all the good points on her body seemed to be covered up and buried in the dust, making her look unremarkable. Clang. The sound of the wooden hammer made Liang Bai suddenly come back to his senses. The competition had officially begun. A total of 18 armaments were lined up one after another on the wooden table. They were all different in shape, and the materials used were also different. Every single one of them had its own purpose, and every single one of them had come from the hands of a martial arts master. To pick out an armament forged by young Master Wu Shuang from so many armaments was simply beyond difficult. Those who were familiar with young Master Wu Shuang could still make a comparison. Continuing his previous habit, they picked out that armament from the pile. But what about those who were not familiar with young Master Wu Shuang? This was like searching for a needle in a haystack. There was no clue at all. The new batch of armament masters glanced at each other and saw the distress in each other's eyes. Even Helian Jiawa couldn't make up her mind. In reality, when martial artists were selecting armaments, they would look at the size of the martial qi emitted by the armaments. The stronger the martial qi, the better the martial skill. Helian Jiawa herself was a 9th-stage martial artist. Her perception towards martial qi was considered to be one of the best among this group of people. It was very obvious that she was hesitating between that green jade longsword and the black tortoise bow and arrow, these two armaments. There was another most important point in selecting armaments, and that was that time was very important. If you took a fancy to this armament, and the other party also took a fancy to this armament, then whoever wanted to snatch it would be considered the winner. Therefore, when the gong sounded, everyone rushed to the front of the 18 armaments and crazily stroked and caressed those armaments. Only Helian Vivian didn't immediately move. Instead, she slid her hand over the surface of those armaments inch by inch. The light in her eyes was so deep that people couldn't see through what she was thinking. Below the stage, someone laughed out loud. Look at her. She wouldn't be stupid, right? I reckon that she simply doesn't know which armament to start with. Without martial qi, she can't even use the most basic perception ability. Looks like we're definitely going to win this bet. That goes without saying, ha ha ha. Mocking laughter continuously transmitted over. When those aristocratic young masters saw this, they also pondered and laughed along. Sounds very interesting. Hey, I say, should we also bet and see who wins and who loses? Sure. Immediately, someone agreed. Lord, who do you plan to bet on? That goes without saying. I'm definitely betting on Helian Jiawa to win. Murong Chang Feng didn't listen to the surrounding mocking. He absent-mindedly made a sound of yen, and then he intentionally bet some money on Helian Jiawa. Basically, all of the young masters sitting in the private room had bet, and those who bet on Helian Vivian to lose, received the full amount. That's not right. Not the full amount. There were still 2 people who bet on Helian Vivian to win. One was Helian Vivian herself. The other one, everyone looked at that list of names in disbelief. Their eyes were filled with shock. How could that person be here? Moreover, he always didn't put anything in his eyes, let alone gambling. But, this time, he actually bet so much money on Helian Vivian, just when those aristocratic young masters were incomparably shocked. The deep and languid voice rang out again, sounding very calm. Raise the stakes. This voice. Some people looked towards the private room at the side. After Murong Chang Feng heard this sentence, the hand holding the teacup tightened by 3 degrees. Is it the royal family? Someone asked, not certain. But then they heard that deep and low voice again. Add another 100 taels of gold on Helian Vivian, bet that she wins. What? When everyone heard this sentence, they all frowned. How could that trash who didn't know how to do anything possibly win? What's more, wasn't she already panicking right now? She didn't even know the most basic martial qi sensing. She could only foolishly stand there. If she didn't move, others would decide which armament to choose. Woman, what's wrong? Is it very difficult this time? Yuan Ming arrogantly raised the corner of his mouth. Seeing that she wasn't as quick as she usually was, he also started to have some doubts. Helian Vivian's fingers rested on her chin. Her fingertips lightly tapped her chin, then she slowly closed her eyes. What is she doing? Now she's not even looking. Yuan Ming listened to the noise all around and frowned. Woman, if it's too difficult, I can. Yuan Ming, don't use your demon's words to tempt me. Helian Vivian opened her eyes. Her bright black eyes looked up, then she walked towards that wooden table. The people below the stage laughed disdainfully. Even the judges on the stage shook their heads. I'm afraid this Hellion Vivian has no hope. She only started to choose now. Compared to the others, she's slower by half. Jing Wushuang's side profile was still as cultured and refined as before. Only this time, he unexpectedly opened his mouth, accompanied by a light cough, as clear as water. Not necessarily. Chapter 117. For a moment, the judging panel was quiet to the extreme. As if they didn't expect that young Master Wu Shuang would speak up for a good-for-nothing, those judges one after another looked towards the side of Jing Wushuang's face. Their eyes carried astonishment. The latter's eyes were indifferent, without the slightest ripple. Perhaps, young Master Wu Shuang was only kind-hearted and didn't want to casually deny someone. However, since young Master Wu Shuang said so, then they'll wait and see. However, they still felt that the result was already decided. That Hellion Vivian wouldn't win. Maybe her luck would be good and she would pick up something. But to choose the one personally made by young Master Wu Shuang among all these armaments, luck was far from enough. The judges looked at each other and each of them had the choice in their hearts. This time's armament test, only young Master Wu Shuang knew the correct answer. Even they weren't clear which one was the real one. However, based on their many years of experience, that green jade sword and that Xianhuan bow and arrow were very likely made by young Master Wu Shuang. Everyone knew young Master Wu Shuang's habits. It was probably related to him as a person. The things he made would also emit a fragile sense of beauty. From the appearance, these two armaments were actually in line with young Master Wu Shuang's style. It was very obvious that that genius young girl, Hellion Jiaowa, was already close to the answer. Now it was time to see which one she would choose. Compared to the Xianhuan bow and arrow, the green jade sword was clearly sharper. Especially its sword hilt, it was made very delicately and even faintly emitted a jade color. Just as the judges were whispering to each other, the Hellion Jiaowa had already picked up an armament. It was the green jade sword. Everyone was in an uproar, as if the Hellion Jiaowa had already won. However, the armament she picked was indeed good. No matter if it was the workmanship or the martial qi induction, it was top-notch. Even He Ziyi exposed a regretful expression. Wei had made her move too late. This time, she was afraid that she was going to lose. When Hellion Jiaowa picked up the green jade longsword, Hellion Vivian had just picked up the first armament to examine. Seeing this, Hellion Jiaowa sneered and glanced at Hellion Vivian proudly, then returned to her seat. Most of the contestants were almost done with the rest of the armaments, but they were not as fast as the Hellion Jiaowa. However, what made them rejoice was that Wei was at the bottom of the pile. That's why even if there were some people among them who didn't really understand armaments, they also weren't afraid. When they passed by Hellion Vivian, their eyes were filled with schadenfreude. However, Hellion Vivian didn't even raise her head. Instead, she exerted force with her slender fingers, slap, slap. The inspection of the first armament had been completed. Pa. The inspection of the second armament was complete. Her speed was very fast. Indeed, there was order in the chaos. Her slender fingers pushed and closed. Her movements were as if she had gone through professional training, pleasing to the eye. From the moment she picked up the armament, placed it on its side, and then pushed the blade out and closed it again, she had only used a few seconds to do all this. In a split second, everyone was stunned. So much so that they couldn't believe it. Their mouths opened into a big O shape. By the time everyone regained their senses, Hellion Vivian had already started inspecting the 10th armament. She leaned sideways and stuck her face to the armament. Neat and handsome. What's the matter with this trash? Is she on steroids? How can she finish so quickly? I just spent a lot of effort to finish inspecting the first few armament. Look at the way she's holding the armaments. It seems different from us. Of course it's different. How could an ace agent from the 21st century hold a weapon like a normal person? To Hellion Vivian, the first thing she did after waking up was to take out her gun, dismantle it and reassemble it. Not to mention when she was carrying out a mission, she had to change weapons while evading gunfire. Just inspecting 10 or so armaments took up a lot of time. When she was bored in class, she would fiddle around with the armaments and look for opportunities to avoid the teacher. She had long practiced her skills to perfection. If she couldn't even handle this little thing, how could she be the boss of her own armaments shop? Bang! When Hellion Vivian put down the last armament, the faces of those people who were far behind her changed. They had really never seen such a fast person. How long had it been, and she had already finished inspecting all the armament. Did she even need to look? She just used her hands to move them back and forth. Even if it was an inspection, the competitors couldn't help but stop their movements and stare blankly at Hellion Vivian. Not to mention that the competitors were shocked. Even the armaments masters sitting on the judging panel were also seeing someone inspect armaments like this for the first time. After all, to see if an armament was good or bad, one had to observe many things to make a comprehensive judgment. Someone like Hellion Vivian was really rare. Young master, look at this. One of the judges looked towards Jing Wushuang. Jing Wushuang grasped the teacup in her hand. The water in the cup rippled as she gently said two words, very fast. It really is very fast. Someone continued the conversation. However, it's easy to make mistakes when inspecting armaments like this. Being too fast isn't necessarily a good thing. You'll often miss a lot of details. Yuan Ming also knew this logic. He raised his eyebrows. Woman, maybe you should inspect it again before making a decision. No need. Hellion Vivian turned her finger and picked up an armament on the table. This is it. Everyone followed her voice and looked over. After seeing the thing in her hand, hissing sounds came from all directions. Just now, seeing how beautiful her movements were, they wondered what kind of armament she would choose. At the very least, it would be a Xianhuan bow and arrow that was on par with the Hellion Jiaowa. They didn't expect that she would actually choose a pitch-black umbrella. The handle of the umbrella wasn't gold or silver, but rather the most ordinary black. From afar, it even had a kind of worn-out feeling. First of all, the appearance of this armament was already very degrading. It didn't look like a top-notch armament at all. In addition, good armaments paid particular attention to attack power. An umbrella? Did she think she was choosing a daily necklace to use to block the rain? Waves of laughter came from below the stage. The taste of ridicule was very strong. Miss Hellion couldn't choose anything, so she set out from the practical point. However, that umbrella's color actually matches Miss Hellion's face. It's the same black color, ha 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 ha. Hellion Jiaowa also almost couldn't hold back her laughter. However, she didn't forget that this was in front of people. She did her best to suppress the corners of her mouth and seemed to be very considerate. Big sister, you'd better choose something else. If you choose this umbrella, it'll be a waste of that wonderful performance you put so much effort into just now. Chapter 118. At first glance, Hellion Jiaowa's words sounded as if she was thinking for Hellion Vivian. But in reality, when these words were said in this kind of situation, not only would everyone not sympathize with Hellion Vivian, they would even think that she had just finished inspecting the armaments so quickly in order to attract everyone's attention. Sure enough, once Hellion Jiaowa's voice fell, everyone's gaze towards Hellion Vivian immediately became even more disdainful. Some people really know how to act. Isn't that so? These methods one after another, no wonder she could get close to Grandmaster Zizun. She obviously doesn't even know what armaments are, yet she's still putting on an act to attract the judge's attention. Truly disgusting. Ridicule came one after another. Hellion Jiaowa's pair of eyes slightly drooped, and her red lips curved into a smile. This was exactly the effect she wanted. Even if that slut wouldn't fly into a rage like before, she had already achieved her goal. She just wanted to let that slut, who was an eyesore everywhere, have a taste of being spurned by tens of thousands of people. However, Hellion Vivian's face didn't have the slightest bit of change. She still had a clear and evil smile. Her wide red robes fluttered in the wind, a red that was as red as blood, like a blood lotus amidst this 100 feet of soft red. Then, she opened her mouth. Every word was as heavy as 1,000 pieces of gold. The judges haven't announced the answer yet. Aren't you guys a bit too noisy? Hellion Vivian held the umbrella in her hand and placed it on the ground. That calm and unruffled appearance was like that of a queen's, gentlemanly, free and easy. Just by standing there like that, she actually gave people a kind of invisible oppressive feeling. Hearing this, the calm eyes of the man sitting in the private room flashed with a trace of color that was hard to detect. It was impossible to deeply decipher the meaning of this color, but those two sexy thin lips seemed to slightly curve upwards, clearly revealing an evil aura. The red-haired man standing to the side rubbed his beast eyes. "Master, just now you smiled." The man didn't speak, only looking at him, slightly narrowing his ink-black eyes. The red-haired man retracted his hand and rubbed his nose, muttering softly, "I was wrong, okay?" The man retracted his gaze and said in a cold voice, "You've lived for too long, so it's inevitable that you're seeing things. You're old, I can understand." Red-haired man. That was why no matter what kind of master one looked for, one shouldn't look for someone with a venomous tongue that would make one gnash their teeth in anger. It was simply infuriating, but he couldn't pay with his life. How was it old? That was right. It had lived for tens of thousands of years, but it was still pursued by many divine beasts. Every time those little divine beasts saw it, they would blush and scold it. It was just too loyal and hadn't considered mating yet, but its master actually called it an old man. Whoosh. Let's see if he looks younger tomorrow. The man's expression did not change as he allowed the mythological beast to scratch the wall behind him. His eyes widened as he looked at the stage again. At this time, all of the competitors had already chosen the martial cultivation they preferred. A total of 18 weapons were held in the palms of the competitors. The elder on the judging panel stood up and said in a loud and clear voice, "It seems that everyone is ready. Then let young Master Wushuang reveal the correct answer. We also don't know whose martial cultivation was personally made by him." "Hihi, young master, please." Jing Wushuang smiled at that elder like warm jade. When he walked, a medicinal fragrance wafted out from his sleeves, making everyone hold their breath. Originally, everyone thought that he was going to stand next to Helian Jiawa, because he had already walked there. But no one expected that in the next moment, he would unexpectedly stand in front of Helian Vivian. The two people's eyes met. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Jing Wushuang smiled and coughed lightly. "This young master wants to ask why Miss Helian chose this one." Helian Vivian also smiled, but she refused to answer this question. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised with an unspeakable recklessness. The competition doesn't seem to have a rule that the competitors have to say why they chose. No matter if it was the modern era or the ancient era. The only thing that truly determined whether a weapon was good or bad was only one word: murderous aura. Helian Vivian was someone who was used to touching guns and ammunition. Without the slightest trace of politeness, when a weapon was in front of her, as long as she touched it, she could determine whether or not this weapon had a martial spirit. The martial spirit here didn't mean that the weapon truly had a soul. Rather, it was a bloodthirsty demonic nature. When Helian Vivian first saw the 18 armaments, her gaze also fell on the green jade longsword that Helian Jiawa chose. But when she truly walked into these armaments, she finally knew which one was the best. The green jade longsword, no matter whether it was the martial chi or the connection, was extremely perfect. It could be seen that it came from the hands of a master. But it was too gentle. Perhaps many people thought that young Master Wushuang was truly a person who stood aloof from worldly affairs. After all, every single one of the armaments he made before was like this. But Helian Vivian didn't think that he was gentle at all. Just based on the fact that he took action to help her escape from Beligaju's pursuit, she could see that he wasn't like the rumors. On the contrary, for a young master who was born in an aristocratic family of armaments, he was always plagued by illness. In the depths of his heart, there must be something hidden. This also meant that his most perfect work absolutely wouldn't be so gentle. Of course, the most important thing was that the umbrella in her hands wasn't a real umbrella at all. When Helian Vivian thought of this, her thin lips curled up. Her finger slid to an exquisite button, and the corner of her mouth carried a trace of evil. This was the key point. If she didn't guess wrongly, this umbrella should have the same wonderful characteristics as the wings of the night god that she had previously made. Before coming here, Xiaobai had said that Jing Wushuang had the best armaments in the world in her hands. As for the difference between these materials and other materials, other than Jing Wushuang, no one knew. Perhaps it was hidden in this umbrella. Hellion Vivian once again pushed the umbrella upwards, and when she met Jing Wushuang's slightly sunken eyes, she smiled, completely ignoring the noise around her. Chapter 119. What kind of situation was this? Not to mention the people watching the excitement below the stage, even the judges were dumbfounded. The young master meant to say that the umbrella was made by him. The elder's eyes widened as he asked incredulously, "Young master, this armament was made by me. The rest all came from the hands of masters from various sects." Jing Wushuang lightly coughed, stabilized her breath, and then smiled gently. "Therefore, Miss Hellion Vivian is the winner." Impossible. Everyone started to clamor. How was this possible? How could young Master Wu Shuang's final product be an umbrella? This made the martial artists who came purely to see the armament thoroughly irritable. What kind of joke was this? How could the Grand Armament Assembly fool people like this? What happened to being an awesome and exceptional martial artist? The elder looked at the red-eyed martial artists below the stage and immediately panicked. He had never encountered this kind of situation before. Originally, he wanted to invite young Master Wu Shuang over to support the armament assembly. But now, how was this supporting the assembly? This was clearly smashing the assembly. Facing the questioning below the stage, Jing Wushuang didn't say anything. Instead, she took the umbrella from Hellion Vivian's hand and pressed it with the side of her hand. That umbrella actually disappeared. Completely and thoroughly disappeared. Without waiting for everyone to come back to their senses. They only heard a "pa" sound and that umbrella reappeared. Carrying a faint light, it rotated into a sharp long blade. Everyone looked at this scene, dumbstruck. Jing Wushuang's tone was indifferent as she instructed the person behind her, "Uncle Liang, use your 5th level martial qi to attack me." "But young master, your body." Uncle Liang worriedly wrinkled his eyebrows. The young master's body was originally weak, and on top of that, he had rushed for 2 days on the road. He was really afraid that the young master wouldn't be able to take this punch. "No problem." Jing Wushuang's expression still didn't change. However, Hellion Vivian could clearly sense the hesitation in his voice. She had more or less heard rumors about Jing Wushuang. It was nothing more than a rich but unfortunate life, and the heavens were jealous of her talents. From the moment he was born, he possessed the most envious talent in martial cultivation. However, due to the limitations of his body, he would never be able to use martial arts. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She walked in front of Jing Wushuang and smiled. "Give me the umbrella. Let Uncle Liang attack me." She had already guessed what this person wanted to prove to everyone. Jing Wushuang's eyes paused. Then, he reached out and handed the umbrella over. The man sitting in the private room looked at this scene, and his deep eyes seemed to be imprinted with a touch of coldness. It seemed that he should take some time to tell his prey. He really didn't like it when someone touched what belonged to him. The tip of his tongue swept across his thin lips. The corners of the man's mouth curled up. His long black hair hung down, and there was a kind of evil aura that could move one's soul. The red-haired man's scalp went numb from his smile. He continued to stretch out his claws, scratching the floor. However, he saw Hellion Vivian standing on the stage turn her hand. The black umbrella unexpectedly drew out a silver light that shouldn't appear here. "That is." The red-haired man raised his eyebrows and concentrated on looking at the thing that came out of the spirit forest. "This is interesting. Uncle Liang, come on." Hellion Wei lightly curved her lips into a smile, her hand holding the handle of the umbrella. Uncle Liang didn't hesitate this time. He gathered qi in his palm and struck towards Hellion Vivian's direction, only to hear a peng sound. Hellion Vivian held the umbrella. Her body didn't move at all. All of the attack power was slowly opened up by the umbrella's invisible barrier, and heavily rebounded back. Everyone was stunned, and they all sucked in a deep breath. Surprised screams swept through the entire venue. "Awesome. If I could have this kind of armament, I would be invincible under the heavens." As expected of young Master Peerless, too awesome. Praises came like a tide, but no one knew that at this moment, even Jing Wushuang's heart was filled with a trace of astonishment. When he made the 1,000-chance umbrella, he only made it have a defensive ability. It couldn't reflect attacks. But now, Jingwu Shuang lowered his eyes and looked at the young girl who was still smiling faintly. He seemed to have understood something all of a sudden, and his pupils constricted. It's her. It's her who changed the 1,000-chance umbrella's martial nature. On top of the foundation of defense, she added an anti-attack ability. And the 1,000-chance umbrella was actually willing to change. That meant that the 1,000-chance umbrella had already begun to recognize an owner. Jing Wushuang's clenched hands slowly loosened. Her eyes were calm. Was this Hellion Vivian really that famous trash in Beijing? Her ability wasn't just this little bit. To be able to grasp the 1,000-chance umbrella's abilities so quickly, not only did she need to be familiar with martial arts, she also needed to have unfathomable martial qi. And according to legend, these were all things that Hellion Vivian shouldn't have. It's really a good item. Hellion Vivian put away the umbrella. That umbrella seemed to be responding to her, emitting a faint light. Good girl. Hellion Vivian smiled. I should return you to your owner. Jing Wushuang looked at her and recovered her usual elegance. Its current owner is you. You won this martial arts competition. This time, the venue was especially quiet. No one said anything, because the truth was right there. Hellion Vivian really did choose the most stunning martial arts in this venue. And the Hellion Jiaowa that they looked forward to the most, actually lost. At that moment, Hellion Jiaowa's face became extremely unsightly. She couldn't bear it and tightly clenched her hands under her long sleeves, but she had no choice but to force a smile and wait for the end of the competition. Hellion Vivian's victory was like a slap to her face. How could that slut have such good luck? The aristocratic young masters who lost a large amount of money were also somewhat surprised. They turned their heads and looked at Murong Changfeng sitting next to them. Lord, when did this woman learn how to play with martial arts? You didn't even know. It was just a moment of luck. Murong Changfeng's eyes sunk, slowly clenching his hands. Of course he didn't know. If he knew, maybe there was no maybe. Just like what he said, it was just a moment of luck. Murong Changfeng looked below the stage, his lower jaw was very tight. Those young masters also didn't have the mood to think about whether or not Hellion Vivian was just a moment of luck. They only knew that this time they lost miserably. Sigh. On the other side, in a delicately decorated private room, the red-haired man looked at his master, who suddenly put down his teacup and suspiciously raised his eyebrows. Master, we're not going to watch until the end. The man didn't answer his question. Instead, he slowly curved his lips into a bewitching smile, giving people a faint feeling of black-bellied. It's time to close the net. Close what net? The red-haired man still hadn't reacted from the scene just now. The man unhurriedly straightened his sleeves, pausing after each word, a net to catch foxes. After he finished speaking, the man stood up. Wearing a white fur cloak, the sleeves slightly fluttered, extremely cold. Within 100 meters, no one dared to approach half a step. With this kind of celestial charm, if it wasn't the current third Prince Beligaju, who else could it be? Chapter 120. There were still some people who didn't want to believe this result, especially the contestants. If they lost to Hellion Jiaowa, it would at least be easier for them to accept. Losing to a trash without qi. Just thinking about it made them feel very uncomfortable. Wei didn't care whether or not they would be comfortable. The corners of her mouth carried an indifferent smile. She didn't pay attention to those gazes that were looking at her. She tidied up a bit, put away the treasured 1,000-chance umbrella that she just obtained. She eagerly changed her clothes and dressed up properly. She planned to go to the gambling house to collect money. What could be more pleasurable than winning a competition and earning money at the same time? Hellion Wei whistled merrily as she strolled along. The result. What did you say? 2 million taels? Hellion Vivian looked at the bill in her hand. Her usually indifferent eyes had a slight ripple in them. Someone bet 10,000 taels on me. And it was in gold. Who in the world was so crazy? Didn't they know that she was trash? And they even bet money on her. The person who started the gambling house nodded and shrunk back a little. Yuan Ming loudly laughed. 1 to 10, Woman, this time you're in trouble. Helene Vivian narrowed her eyes and rubbed her chin. She raised her eyebrows and asked the person who started the gambling house, "Who bet on me? Do you still remember?" The person who started the gambling house nodded. "I remember. That person has a head of red hair and is wearing good silk. He's drinking tea on the second floor." Second floor? Helene Vivian's eyes flashed. She picked up the umbrella and planned to go upstairs. The person who started the gambling house sighed and said, "Boss, are you really planning on giving all this money to that person? How is that possible?" Helene Vivian looked at him with astonishment. "Where did you get that misconception from?" The person who started the gambling house said, "Then what are you going to do? Walk right into a trap? Go to bargain?" Helene Vivian curved her lips into a smile, overflowing with a trace of wickedness. The second floor of the Phoenix building was called Heaven. It was a first-class private room. Those who could stay here for an hour were either rich or noble young masters in the capital. According to the waiter, that person had been sitting in the private room for 4 hours, and the things he ordered were the most expensive in the building. It seemed that the other party had a powerful background. However, Helene Vivian really couldn't think of anyone in Armament City, other than those 2 people she was collaborating with, who had such a large amount of financial resources. Helene Wei looked at the wooden door in front of her and politely knocked on it. Very soon, a deep and magnetic voice came from inside. It was a little unclear because of the wooden door. "Come in." It was just a single word, but it was like the clang of a fine sword being unsheathed. It had a metallic texture, and it subconsciously made people submit. Helene Vivian thought to herself, "This person must be very good at giving orders. Later, when it's time to haggle, I must use all my strength and directly KO the other party." It had to be said that dreams were plentiful, but reality was bony. When Helene Vivian confidently pushed open the wooden door, the person half leaning on the carved wooden couch just happened to raise his eyes. He absent-mindedly switched hands. His black hair was like ink, and his white clothes were like snow. His slender fingers rested on top of the light cyan enamel tea lid. Taking advantage of the smoke from the tea rising in spirals, he faintly looked at Helene Vivian through the hazy fog. Helene Vivian's entire scalp went numb. It was as if she had suddenly fallen into a 10,000-year-old ice cellar. In a flash, she froze. Why was he here? Right now, the situation was so chaotic. All the people from the large clans were still restless and wanted to get rid of the imperial family at all times. It was fine if he stayed in the capital, but running to Armament City without warning, wasn't he afraid of being assassinated? Wait a minute. He couldn't have come specifically to catch her, right? However, there wasn't anything to worry about. In any case, she had already changed her disguise. Even if the third prince was extraordinarily resourceful, he still wouldn't be able to recognize her at first glance. Helene Vivian thought in her heart that as long as her disguise was perfect enough, he wouldn't do anything to a strange man. It seemed that her arrival disturbed his rest. His entire person seemed to have been born from ice and snow, noble and flawless. Carrying an ascetic charm, there wasn't a trace of emotion leaking out. He looked at her with a deep gaze, making one unable to guess whether he was happy or angry. "Come here. Ian." Helene Vivian looked at him, puzzled. She, who had recovered her true appearance, looked at him with eyes that could speak, making one's heart itch. Beligaju swept a glance at the closed door. He controlled his temper and said again, "Come here." Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. How could the third prince use this kind of tone to speak to a man? How should she say? It was strange. Could it be that it was as she had guessed, that he was a homosexual? The more Helene Vivian thought about it, the more likely it was. She smiled and said, "I think your distinguished self has misunderstood my identity. I am the boss of this gambling house, not some small boy." Small boy? Fire Chalene, who was hiding in the mysterious spatial space, was puzzled. Why did this woman suddenly mention a small boy? Could it be that she didn't recognize Master? That wasn't possible. Hadn't they only not met for 2 days? Oh, it knew, because she had changed her disguise. Did she think that she could fool Master with this disguise? She was really naive. When they were in the mysterious forest, Master had already exposed her. But, what the hell was a small boy? Fire Chalene's eyebrows wrinkled even more. Even Beligaju raised his eyes and looked at Hellion Vivian. From this calm reaction, the other party shouldn't have recognized her. Otherwise, with the third prince's temperament, when he saw her, he would have rushed over and used his freezing skill to kill her. But now, he had merely glanced at her once more, and there was even a faint smile in his eyes. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and hid the smile on her face, showing her respect. She couldn't treat the third prince with the same attitude as before. When doing business, she had to act like a business. Bailey Jiaoju looked at her extremely well-behaved and distant expression. His eyes suddenly sank, and the coldness in his pupils also quickly spread. The hand that was holding the teacup followed and tightened. He used a lot of strength and almost crushed the porcelain cup into pieces. Hellion Vivian saw that the other party didn't speak and thought that she didn't explain in detail, so she directly said, "If your distinguished self can lower the stakes a bit, I can help you find a few small boys to serve you." Hearing this, Fire Chalene sucked in a breath of air. This woman meant to say, "Master, he." Fire Chalene swallowed his saliva and didn't dare to look at his master's cold face. He was sure that this woman was dead for sure. How about it? Hellion Vivian felt that she was already very sincere. She looked at Beligaju with a smile that said, "I understand you very well." The man also smiled. His pleasant voice carried a bewitching chill. "That's a good idea. It sounds very tempting, but..." As Beligaju spoke, he slowly walked towards Hellion Vivian. His heavy eyes forced her into a corner. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.